He spoke with a dull, emotionless tone. However, there were ripples in Muyang's eyes. It's not hard to kill him again. Even if it was an illusion, Muyang had already happily killed assassins including Wang Chunglin in the trial of Gremory, the Star of David. Muyang had not once regretted his decision. Even if he was put in the same situation, he will redo what he had done. His firm determination allowed him to pass the trial at the Star of David. Did Wang Chunglin send you? To procure materials to create an assassination machine. The eyes of the assassin who entered the room were also completely calm. Muyang wasn't able to feel any emotions from him. It was because he was a puppet. However, the process of making a puppet was unbearably horrifying. Following Chunglin's orders, after hundreds of materials are collected, only 1% of them would survive. The surviving 1% would be then castrated from all emotions and would become a marionette on a string. Muyang chuckled. He could only laugh. He couldn't understand why he bothered to talk to him when he knew already that the man would not reply. Was it because he still hoped he might reply? From the position Muyang was in, he just lifted his upper body, sat on the side of the bed and spoke. Right, we didn't exist even from the start. Crack. The man's neck snapped. And the eyes of an assassin were turned off. He was instantly killed. Muyang quietly turned his head and gazed at the red full moon. Including Muyang, assassins were the ones who normally lived in the shadows. Since they could never come out into the light, it was like they didn't exist. Shadows. They were the ones who existed but weren't really there. Even if they were alive, it was no way of living, as no one will mourn for their death. Don't you want to revenge him? The man who filled himself up with your blood. The already dead body didn't move a muscle. However, Muyang looked at the eyes of the dead man, feeling what was beyond those eyes. He thought he was feeling the trembling cry of his soul. Art of death. The dark aura which emitted from his entire body touched the corpse of the assassin. Avenger has been created. Plus very high resistance to darkness. Plus high movement speed in darkness. Plus binding of the darkness, shadow hide and crit skills are usable. Plus you get closer to darkness as your darkness aura increases. Nothing particularly changed on the outside. But his eyes were emitting a fierce beast's aura. He was definitely more assimilated in darkness. Prince and his subjects. Right away Muyang summoned the Dark Ghoul. The Dark Ghoul was able to select up to 30 ghouls and increase all their stats by 5. Avenger was a ghoul-type undead. Just in time, he had extra space from the fight with the fire dragon Wu. With this, he was now able to summon the Avenger when he summoned the prince and his subjects. Since he only needed the Dark Ghoul to maintain the effect, he summoned back the regular ghouls. Even though he was a low-ranked assassin, this should do. The Forest of Death always operated with 500 assassins. The lower the number, the stronger the person, and the higher the number, the weaker the person. In the past, of course, Muyang was number 1. Since Chunglin had died, you could say he was in reality number 0. Number 447 meant that he was low-ranked within the Forest of Death. Either way, only low-ranked assassins would go out to hunt for beginners. The Forest of Death operated under the silent protection of all the guilds and clans. Therefore, it was possible for the low-ranked assassins to wander around the great city. All the big shots lived inside the castle in the middle of the great city, so there wasn't anyone who could restrain them. Wang Chunglin isn't here. At first, Muyang believed that Chunglin would be somewhere around here. However, after looking at a couple of places in the great city, he concluded that Chunglin wasn't here. If he was here, the Hell Horse would have tried to make him use up one of his favors. The horse would be willing to protect him if a situation arose where someone whom Muyang was unable to win against was present. Its stealth ability was so great that even Muyang was unable to tell where it was. None of the strong currently gathered here were able to sense the Hell Horse. That meant that Chunglin's presence could potentially be found. But wasn't it quiet? That meant the stage was set for Muyang to freely act. I will gather your brothers. Muyang wasn't planning on having number 447 be all alone. After making all the assassins here into the undead, his goal was to take all 500 of the members and make a surprise attack on Chunglin. Muyang took out his talisman and took out his equipment. The lunatic sovereign's set. He went out of the window after putting his red cape and his red helmet on. Shish. Behind him, the Dark Ghoul and the Avenger followed. It wasn't the best move to search every place and rule them out one by one. First, how efficiently they did this was a big problem. Muyang only had his own body while there were many assassins. There should be about 100 low-ranked assassins currently active. That was why Muyang waited at a path where they will commonly pass. The Great City was just a location where they used a special talisman to release the ancient king's castle. Secret hidden pathways existed and Muyang knew the locations of such pathways very well. On a night of a full moon, a place where even the shadows weren't reflected. It was a path that led to the underground tunnel and was also a place that couldn't be detected from afar. Muyang stood outside the stream of consciousness. Soon, four assassins who kidnapped beginners discovered him as they approached. Muyang welcomed them when he was still wearing his lunatic sovereign's set. No conversation was needed. Showing them was enough. He took out Anguish and ran straight towards them. It was even before they placed down the beginners. Muyang was half a step faster. Muyang just broke off their swords and stabbed Anguish into their hearts. Cough, cough. Anguish hungrily devoured the dripping blood. Muyang turned his body while pulling out Anguish. The assassin beside him placed his hand on top of Muyang. Crack. Muyang grabbed hold of his wrist and twisted it. However, assassins were resistant to pain. Muyang didn't stop after he twisted the assassin's arm. Bosh. From his position he just lifted his elbow and smacked the man's chin. Anguish headed for the man's heart like a snake when he fell down from a concussion. Swish. And without giving away any signs he took out 2 daggers from his bosom and threw it behind his back. One fell on the floor but the other one avoided by hitting it away. Muyang just looked into his eyes. Under a silent night, the assassin ran towards Muyang. There was no turning back for them as their identities were revealed. Items that were to be disposed of after being used. Chunglin never recycled. He could just create another if one dies. That was why Muyang showed how furious he was with his actions. Could be called a fighting aura. The surrounding air and magic all started to rotate around Muyang. Muyang knew everything about assassins of the Forest of Death, including their insignificant actions and habits, their breathing pattern and even the rhythm of their beating heart. Muyang had figured out everything about them as he wanted to assassinate everyone and finally kill Chunglin. He didn't miss even the slightest detail. They are all the same but slightly different. That was how Muyang knew that they weren't just normal puppets. The small habits they had while they were alive didn't change no matter how many times they were corrected and brainwashed. For example, the assassin in front of him. Number 493. You still limp your right foot. Muyang laughed as he showed his teeth. Since number 493 was born, both his foot didn't balance. If he did get a corrective surgery it could have been fixed but after he became an assassin he kept limping his right foot as a habit. As Muyang laughed, he ate up number 493's heart as the assassin approached him. The 4 assassins lied dead on the cold floor. Art of death. But they were revived. In the past they were colleagues, now they were reborn as allies. That's how pitch-dark Avengers revived one after the one, under the red moonlight. The number of Avengers increased. Muyang released them as they were. Muyang couldn't guard all the allies by himself. And the Avengers started to hunt down only assassins. Of course, even with the buff from the prince and his subjects, it wasn't going to be easy. But if he added another effect the story would be different. Sorceress of Lightning. The demi-lich created from Code's dead body from the Lawless clan. The Sorceress of Lightning could place a special effect on a target. Lightning Rune. The Lightning Rune would strengthen its targets. Their strength and stamina increased by about 4 to 6. Although it varied slightly, each one would also have all their stats increased by 5 which allowed them to move beyond what they were capable of before. The Avengers infiltrated deeper into the darkness. Since they were ordered to only use hidden pathways of the castle, there was no way for them to be caught. And dead assassins started to arrive in front of Muyang. All low-ranked assassins under 400. The ones in the 300s were considered mid-ranked. The ones in the 200s were considered high-ranked and the ones in the 100s were top-ranked. Who's like that? If there were assassins from number 400 to 500 currently active, either way he was catching about 100 assassins. Tying down Wang Chunlin. Muyang objectively understood himself. For now all he could do was hold Chunlin back. From the beginning there was no Chunlin and only the low-ranked puppets were active. What was his reason to release all the low-ranked? To kidnap the beginners and to increase his number of puppets. So, the best he could do to hold him back was to stop him from hunting the beginners. Just today is enough. Even if the 9 guilds and the 5 great clans were overlooking them, they couldn't overlook assassins roaming around the great city every night. At the longest just tonight. If the assassins were active again after tonight they would step on them and kill them like bugs. It only looked like this on the outside, but, of course, there were more cases of these large groups using the Forest of Death as a tug-of-war. It was a sort of a promise. Since they would present themselves for show even if their insides were rotten. Even if the Forest of Death was amazing, they existed only because of the agreement between the giants. Anyways, the number of Avengers was continuously increasing. So that after 30 Avengers were filled in, there was a change to the talisman. Dark Aura buff effect has been increased from 30 to 50 ghouls. Evolution of a talisman. Normally, you needed 5 of the same talisman to reinforce the talisman. But this time it was beyond a reinforcement and was closer to an evolvement. It was a surprising event which occurred as the talisman combined with the art of death. So there is even a method like this. Even Muyang didn't expect this to happen. A new idea. It wasn't bad since it was another way for him to increase his strength. Muyang took it positively. Soon the dark ghoul's body became a bit bigger and moved with more agility. Grok. Greg. His nature seemed to have become fiercer. By the influence of the dark ghoul, the Avengers' eyes became more ferocious. The name, Avengers, really suited them as they craved for blood. This was beyond Muyang's control. The corpses aren't intact. Muyang knit his brows. The almost mangled-up corpses of low-ranked assassins started to arrive. Because of this, his frequency of casting the Art of Death skill had decreased, but he didn't mind it. Either way, he was able to completely hold Wang Chunlin back. The failure to collect beginners and the loss of his low-ranked assassins had to be a blow for Chunlin. At that moment, a signal in Muyang's head was cut off. That meant that one of the Avengers had died. They started to retreat. And the last few moments of the ghoul's vision flashed through Muyang's head. He couldn't control undead which were spread out, but like this information could be sent in when an undead died. As he watched the memories that flew into his head, Muyang found many groups. About 30 assassins were moving together and leaving the great city. Number 400. And within the group, one caught Muyang's eyes. Assassins whose number ended in a 2,000 foot were remotely controlled by Chunlin. It was the same as a signal relay. It was a method designed to move assassins more systematically and easier. It was obvious that Wang Chunlin had noticed that something went completely wrong with his plan and ordered them to retreat and leave the great city with the rest of the assassins. Muyang quickly made his decision. Blaze. He lit the corpses on fire with a cold blue face. He was regretful that he couldn't take all his past brothers with him, but if they were to become Avengers in their current state they wouldn't have been useful. It was better to send them off peacefully. Right after he put them on fire, Muyang started to move with all the Avengers, his red cape fluttering behind him. There were many ways to leave the great city, but there was only one path Chunlin frequently used. The underground tunnel, which changed its structure every 14 days. It was a place no one entered because it was filled with filthy waters and rats, but the only advantage of a place like this was that it was unguarded. Normal underground tunnels had magical barriers in preparation for outside intruders. Guards and traps were routinely placed to protect these tunnels. It would be quite annoying for anyone who tried to sneak through secretly. But this pathway which Muyang was in wasn't known to anyone else. Even the top members of the 2 great forces, the Sun Guild and the Lawless Clan, that ruled over the great city didn't know of this secret place. Only Wang Chunlin knew of this place. No, only Muyang and Chunlin knew of this place. However, Chunlin didn't know that Muyang knew about this place. That little difference would lead Chunlin to failure. I was waiting. Swoosh. Muyang pulled out Anguish. As around 30 assassins who were heading towards Muyang hesitated, the Avengers immediately surrounded them. The originally low-ranked assassins were currently strengthened. The Avengers were enhanced as a couple of buffs overlapped. They were as strong as a mid-ranked monster. Crack. Rip. The enraged Avengers all started to go crazy. Muyang climbed a wall and darted towards number 400. Hush. Who are you? A sword met with another. Number 400 directly looked at Muyang. Wang Chunglin. You've personally decided to involve yourself in this. The tips of Muyang's lips started to go up. He who was simply ordering them had borrowed the body of number 400 and appeared. Anguish violently slashed through the air as it craved for blood. A detailed attack that a normal low-ranked assassin wouldn't be able to block was blocked by him. If you put it simply, he was only possessed, but just by adding Chunglin's fighting senses he seemed like a completely different person. How do you know this route? Composed. From the tone of his voice he could sense the composure that only the absolute strong could have. However, Muyang never exposed his full strength. He was facing the opponent with pure technique. And as the fight continued he was sure of one thing. I can win. He was certain that he could win against Wang Chunglin without much difficulty if he was to gain enough strength as he did in the past. Chunglin's skills were fast and detailed like a snake, but Muyang was able to break through all of it. If they used the same skills, why couldn't he break through? Those skills and movements. Where did you learn them? Wang Chunglin. How do you know that name? He who was borrowing the body of number 400 was speechless. He never thought that there was anyone in this world who would know of his name. Chunglin was a person who lived in the shadows. As he never was projected in anyone's conscious, there was no real person who knew of his name. Except Muyang. Thrust. His left shoulder was sliced off. As he lost his balance and was staggering, Muyang ended the fight by piercing Anguish into his belly. I know who you are, but you don't know who I am. You bastard, who are you? His face was covered by the lunatic sovereign's helmet. As of right now, there was no way for Chunglin to find out about Muyang's identity. So Muyang spoke a short warning as if he was whispering. Wait for me. I will go to you. Sis. The kidnapped beginners only woke up the morning of the next day. Where? What's that even? However, blood was spread out everywhere and only burnt corpses were lined up. It seemed like the situation had settled after the guards who were patrolling took them to their inns. However, a doubt still remained. Who kidnapped them and why they were lying down with a bunch of burnt-up corpse? Some testified that they caught a glimpse of a ghoul-like monster, but besides a few, most believed that they were just seeing things. Great guilds and clans were secretly trying to find the culprit, but there was no way they could find a person who had disappeared like a ghost. However, a few people shivered in fear. The Slayer of the tower has returned. Lunch the next day. Muyang was listening to the explanation with a bunch of people on the first floor of the inn. We, the Polonia Guild, are made up of a small number of about 50 elites. We can proudly say that we have been around for 30 years with our own tradition. Right now we have 4 spots available and we are seeking people who would fill in those spots. If you join us, we will fully support you. Oh, we are hoping to find people with stamina above 40. Lunchtime. Out of the blue, a man showed up and started to talk. While others were paying attention to the man, Muyang slowly savored his soup. The 9 guilds and the 5 great clans have already finished contacting people. The people who have been coming over were only small groups who were short on members. As he turned his head, he found Taehuan and Suzy blankly staring at the floor with a quite serious look on their faces. Someone had already contacted them. Even those great guilds and clans couldn't help but covet people who had the potential to be great. As it was good to have lots of outstanding slaves. Of course, no one approached Muyang, who used the information distortion talisman to hide himself. Technically, an assassin approached him, but it wasn't to recruit him but to kidnap him. It was hard to say that he was a welcoming guest. Actually, Muyang could sense a magical scent on Taehuan and Suzy. Indicator skill. The people who approached them left an indication on them. That was why the assassins avoided them. Muyang knew that the beginners with an indication were removed from the list of people who they were to kidnap. Us, the Polonia Guild, knows more about the Sky Library than anyone else. You should already know by now that you could earn a skill that you want from the Sky Library. It is really stupid to enter the library without any information, since what you learn from there will determine your future path and your lifespan. It is necessary for you to learn a skill that's right for you. Many people were interested in the man who was speaking in front of the entrance. There weren't just huge groups in the great city. There were small groups who were busily running around to recruit beginners. Even if there were a lot of reasons, they were mostly after the skill a beginner could learn from the Sky Library. They are probably trying to get people to learn a skill that could be useful to their group or will be helpful in having them pass a trial. There basically was no real group who had pure intentions on helping beginners and fully supporting them. Most were planning on choosing the skill beginners had to learn and use it to their benefit. The Sky Library was vast with many kinds of skills people could learn. Even if they could only choose one, it was clear that that one skill will have a great impact on their future. Of course, there were kind groups who helped people with pure intentions and did not use them. However, you could count them on your fingers, and even if they did exist, they didn't last and disappeared after a few years. And from the looks of it, Muyang thought the Polonia Guild was an outstanding bully. Those who are truly willing to help don't place any requirements. Why would they limit their recruitment to people with stamina above 40? It was because the skill they had to learn had a specific requirement to meet, and it was something they needed right away. It was obvious they were trying to use them. In detail, how are you planning to support us? As the woman who was quietly listening to them asked, the man nicely replied back. A full set of C-ranked gear and basic talismans. We will also introduce you to a good hunting area for you to get stronger. Since we have a few priest classes, they will help you get stronger faster. And above all, the man cleared his throat and continued. There was nothing you could say is truly free. Remember that. Even getting water to drink is done by a trade. I promise that if you join our guild, food and shelter will be freely provided. In this world, is there any common currency? The continuous questions could have irritated him, but the man still answered with a smile. Easiest way is by talismans. F-rank talisman can allow you to eat 3 meals. It's not bad to join a crafting group to make food or items, but because of the poor environment, it wouldn't be easy to survive. I don't really recommend it. The value of currency. It was possible to trade with monster hides and meat, but most commonly used were talismans. It wasn't like everyone fought. Crafting groups truly did exist. However, most the people who joined were scaredy cats and those with physical disabilities. The exceptions were blacksmiths who were better treated, but their work was twice as hard. Normal artisans were unfriendly towards outsiders, and if they didn't raise their rank by completing their associated skills workmanship, they were frequently cast away. The man shrugged his shoulders. There are only a few guilds and clans that give an incredible offer when they recruit beginners. Even the huge guilds and clans, you know them, right? They massacre beginners. Just because it's big, it doesn't mean it's good. So please properly think over it before you make your decision. As if there were other places he could look for people, he ended his talk and clasped his hands behind his back. Everyone started to read each other's faces. One choice. Everything will be determined by this. But there seemed to be no lies in his words. If they were to lose this chance, could they get a place with better conditions? All the people who suffered from the Blue Temple wanted a place where their safety could be assured. Everyone knew that they needed strength. You said you will accept people with stamina above 40? I will join. As one raised their hand, a few others joined. Me too. Accept me too. I'm missing 1 stamina, but could you please accept me? The Polonia Guild filled their 4 spots in an instant. Even afterwards, a few guilds and clans came by. Guilds were mostly made up of Caucasians and black people, and clans were mostly made up of Asians. There were groups with a mix of different people, but there was some racial discrimination going on behind the scenes. And as the numbers in the inn decreased, the people could only become more nervous. The group of 100 people had been reduced to less than 20 within half a day. This tastes good. Muyang didn't care and was silently savoring the taste of the liquor. He couldn't remember the last time he drank. Hyung Nim. As he heard a sound from his side, he turned his head. Taehwan sat beside him, and with a serious face he spoke quietly. An offer came from the Sun Guild. What should I do? The Sun Guild was one of the groups who took care of this great city. Alexandro Quintart. It was a guild where the guild master was also ranked in the top 10 among humans. The Sun Guild was known to only take in less than 10 beginners every month. And a place like this carefully looked at Taehwan and offered to recruit him. Normally, Muyang would have been inattentively glossed over it, but a slight interest rose. Let's talk upstairs. Muyang placed down his liquor glass and stood up from his place. Two people were facing each other in a small room. Before Muyang said anything, Taehwan opened his mouth. They came yesterday afternoon. They said they would offer me a wide building and be ranked equipment. It looks like they thought highly of your potential. I don't know. Only if I had my own estate, could I not separate from everyone and bring them all to my estate? Can't you just do what you want? If the offer isn't bad, there isn't a reason for you to decline. Taehwan let out a long sigh. That is, sigh. I heard that even the Sun Guild sent in a judge in the free-for-all fight. They consider human lives as ants. No matter how tempting their offer is, I don't want to join people like them. There was no way everything would be good. Taehwan's face showed complete loathing. On top of that, I find their intentions a bit strange. It didn't seem like they were simply looking at my potential, but it also looked like they were searching for someone. Even asking weird questions. What kind of weird questions? Muyang's gaze focused on Taehwan. The Sun Guild was looking for someone. It was highly likely it was under Alexandro Quintart's orders. That if I had my name in Solomon's Hall of Fame from the Blue Temple, they would offer me an even better treatment. An A-ranked weapon and talismans, even a small island. I couldn't answer since I didn't know what it was, but similar questions were asked afterwards. The offer couldn't be any better. It was too much of an investment for just a beginner. To get a small island and receive an A-ranked weapon and talismans were something only the top-ranking members of a moderately sized group would get. Although the Sun Guild exceeded that of a moderately sized group, but to a single beginner, that amount of investment was excessive. Even more, providing information on a top-ranked skill in the Sky Library was uncommon. The competition for information on the Sky Library was fierce, and if one mastered a top-ranked skill, it would disappear. It meant it was impossible for someone else to get the skill. They were going to give someone who wasn't a high level or a rising star that kind of information. Even if they were the Sun Guild, they were unable to give out that kind of information limitlessly. It was hard to take it simply as goodwill. They had a goal. They were straightforwardly luring people out with an offer no one could decline. A reward no group could offer. It was closer to a warning. For no one to aim for their target. The Sun Guild had sufficient power to do so. Just why? It's regretful that I pretty much have no information about the Sun Guild currently. Even Muyang couldn't easily stay calm. He didn't have any concrete information about the internal affairs of the Sun Guild at this time. Since there were no requests for assassinating Alexandro Quintart, he was one of the people Muyang didn't kill. Rather, he was one of the few who made the most assassination requests. In reality, it could be considered as the pinnacle of these establishments' power. Since the Dragon Lord was assassinated by Muyang per Alexandro Quintart's request, for someone like him to intervene meant that it wasn't due to personal feelings. To find the one who entered Solomon's Hall of Fame means they are looking for me. There was a chance that someone besides Muyang entered Solomon's Hall of Fame. Since there were many records besides the ones Muyang broke at the Blue Temple. However, there were probably not many records that had Alexandro Quintart of the Sun Guild's name on it. At most, he would have done the boss battles Muyang had done or something harder. Although he thought that someone could find him, for the first to be the Sun Guild was quite unexpected. Muyang was lost in his thoughts for a long time. At that moment, Taehwan said, "Hyung Nim, how about we just make one?" "What?" "Something like a guild. I know that Hyungnim doesn't like taking the lead, but if you are the guild master, at least the people from the same temple would trust and follow you." Muyang shook his head. "I have no thoughts in joining a group." He thought to walk alone. As soon as he joined a group, he could no longer blindly proceed looking forward. There were too many enemies and they were too strong. What was more, Muyang was a human who didn't associate well with group activities. Since he knew himself well, that kind of suggestion wasn't welcoming at all. "Then we need to separate. Won't everyone be nervous?" You do it. Pardon. Making a guild, you do it. Myung coolly said. If he wanted to join the Sun Guild, he wouldn't have stopped him. Although he hoped for his hero qualities to shine, it wasn't impossible for him to make his way up from the bottom. However, if he wasn't going to join, it was better to walk the path of a sovereign. Of course, it was a thorny path that no one wanted to tread. A tall tree would catch much wind. However, if he could endure, he could make a small wave. The small wave would become rough, then become a tidal wave. A hero was that kind of existence. At least it was different from the direction Myung was going in. Taehwan blinked his eyes. It looked like it had never crossed his mind. Taehwan was oblivious to his hero qualities. However, a stubborn spirit that wouldn't easily change wasn't something anyone could have. In Myung's perspective, he had an imperceptible trait that no other hero he had seen until now possessed. If you really want to spread your values, you must. It will be hard, but if you succeed, you will be able to harvest that much fruit. This was the most advice Myung could give. The rest was up to Taehwan. Taehwan continued to sit in his spot for a long time. Myung looked at Taehwan for a moment before leaving the room. He had no thoughts of taking the obvious bait. If he didn't have his past memories, he may have grabbed at the Sun Guild's bait, but since he knew how different Alexandro Quintart was on the inside, he was planning on not even showing any traces. When the morning brightened the next day, Myung calmly walked around the great city. The building styles that reminded you of the Middle Ages. There were countless individuals gathered, and occasionally beginners were mixed in as well. Recruiters. And among them, there were some who hid their traces and were observing the people around them. They were recruiters who were spread out to look for any hidden pearls that they might have missed. Myung openly strutted along the path and showed everyone who spotted him that he had no ability. Various fried skewers that will never appear in this world again. We trade 5 for any magical treasure. You will definitely need small cute hunting dogs. I will draw you a photo-like picture. Leave one as a memory. The great city was in the peak of celebrations. The rush that would only happen once a month. The time when tens of thousands of beginners entered the underworld. Items like talismans earned from the Blue Temple and rewards from trials would overflow. Although the strong wouldn't spare a glance for those that had been here for only a few years or those who had given up on getting stronger, it was their livelihood. The number of people that resided in the great city was close to 1 million. Not everyone could be part of a group or be strong. And as for talismans, no matter how low-ranked they were, they could be reinforced or combined, so it was widely used as currency. The beginners who didn't know the importance of talismans had no hesitation. In fact, they seemed too excited that the talismans they thought were useless could be used as currency. There were blessings hidden within the ancient king's castle. Myung ignored them and walked around the exterior of the castle. The locations of each building were the same as his memories. Although he walked at his quickest pace, he was barely able to complete a circle by nightfall. This was the hidden function of the ancient king's castle. Though there was a condition to start in the morning and end at night, there weren't many people who knew this. Like this, there were many hidden secrets about the ancient king's castle. Next, I meditate for 2 hours at the clock tower. There was a blessing that increased your stamina by 1 at the clock tower. They were laughable conditional blessings, but it was most likely that the ancient king was an eccentric person who had a great interest in art. It could be deduced by looking at the style of the buildings and their arrangement. He couldn't waste time by waiting to enter the Sky Library. Myung moved diligently. A few days later, a man wearing a sun helmet stormed into the inn. Myung, Bae Suzy and Lilo, would you please follow me? He called out 3 people. Myung instinctively knew that it was time to enter the Sky Library. Since only 300 people could enter at once, he thought he would have to wait longer. It was unexpected that he was called second. Mr. Let's go. Suzy, who had spent the past few days worrying, confidently stormed out. It looked like she had made a big decision. Myung briefly looked at her before reminding himself of his goal once again. Eye of the Sky. The skill he must obtain at the Sky Library. He had to obtain that skill at the Sky Library no matter what. A universal window of knowledge that could let you know all the information in the Sky Library. Although information was limited to the skill rank, Looking at a single aspect of the library would be of great help. The Eye of Sky was something that could supplement things that Muyang never realized. No matter what. He slowly moved his feet. The Sky Library was located on the west side of the castle. Just like its name, the library was floating in the sky. Luckily, there were stairs made up of clouds that led to it. 300 people were gathered in front of the grand entrance and were waiting for the previous group to come out. And a person among them. There's a kid from the Sun Guild. A boy who looked to be about 16 was standing at the very front. He was a likable boy wearing a sun helmet. Around half the people, including the boy, looked very confident. Those that had applied to guilds and clans. They had changed their equipment and they knew information about the Sky Library beforehand. However, the Sky Library was definitely not an easy place. The trial would always change. There was no way they would just hand out free skills. The higher-ranked skills were set up to be harder to obtain and the trials would change each time. The moment you let down your guard, you would lose your life. Creak dash. Soon the door of the Sky Library opened and people popped out. Around 220 people. Most of them had their shoulders dangling down. The dark circles under their eyes indicated that they weren't able to get a wink of sleep. They walked down the stair like corpses. Everyone understood that those who did not exit had perished. You can go in now. A man wearing a sun helmet was guarding the surroundings. Once a person took the lead and put out his hand, everyone else lowered their breaths and started to enter the Sky Library. Creak. Thud. The door closed and a long message appeared on the status viewer. Shadow. So it's the spirit affiliation trial. The surroundings were pitch black. A light would come on and off repeatedly every 3 seconds. A low-ranked room. 12 shadows. Why is the light constantly going off and on? Although people tilted their heads in doubt, they were able to see that books were lined up all around them due to the blinking lights. An overwhelmingly large area. An endless supply of books lined up in long rows. It felt like it was wider than when they saw it outside. First, let's move. Wait. It looks like there's something on the floor. Gasp. Before they could move, a person was already in his death throes. It was because the person beside him had suddenly attacked. Is this bastard crazy? Since he acted in front of everyone, there was no way he was going to walk on his 2 feet again. At the moment they were about to strike the attacker with eyes filled with anger. This is an order. Beware of the spirits on the floor. And be alert of people with 2 shadows. The boy wearing a sun helmet yelled. His situational judgment is good. Muyang silently looked at his surroundings. 11 spirits left. There were spirits that would stop when the lights were on and moved when the lights were off. The spirits could possess the people they touched. The first one had died, so there were 11 left. People scanned the floor with blazing eyes. However, no matter how good their eyes were, it wasn't easy for them to get used to the brightness and darkness when it changed every 3 seconds. Even if they were able to adapt, it wasn't possible for them to catch all the moving shadows. 2 shadows. What am I supposed to do? Kill it. Chaos erupted. It was their first time they were facing a trial like this. This was not a normal monster attack. A person next to someone could be possessed by a shadow and attack them. The only way to know if a person was possessed or not was by checking if the person had 1 or 2 shadows. However, no one fully understood how they were supposed to suppress them. We got a hard trial. It was very rare for people to get a trial with spirits where it was hard to do anything. They had to solve the trial by continuously using their wits and agility since physical attacks didn't work. Scrunch. Susie grabbed Muyang's clothes. She seemed scared of the spirits of the dead as her body was slightly shaking. She was used to monsters and people dying, but the spirits were on a slightly different level than them. As Muyang's gaze reached Susie, she straightened her back. I'm not scared. But can I just stay like this for a moment? Use your Sword of Dawn. Right now? Muyang nodded. Susie used her other hand to summon the Sword of Dawn. The Sword of Dawn was created using magical power as its foundation. The light properties of the Valkyrie of Dawn contrasted with the dark properties of the spirits. There was a chance that it would work. A shadow is approaching. When I signal you, slice him. Yes, I understand. A shadow was recklessly storming towards them. Young's eyes were able to penetrate into the deep darkness clearer than anyone else. Yow. Ha. Slash. The sword of dawn split straight into the shadow's head. However, the shadow only staggered for a moment. It didn't stop approaching them. Young grabbed the back of Susie's neck and lifted her up. Like a cat that moved a kitten by biting the nape of its neck, Young quickly moved away from the area the shadows were located before letting Susie go. It worked, but her abilities weren't enough to slice it. It was Young's tentative decision. It was difficult to stop the spirits with Susie's power. That meant he needed to find another plan. Since the method of completing spirit trials was always different, it was wise to think of all the possibilities while moving. They must really be ghosts. My attacks don't work. Susie's whole body shivered. Her actions were like that of a small squirrel. At that moment, the boy wearing the sun helmet shouted amidst the chaos. Light. There has got to be a device to turn on the library lights. Find it. It was ironic, but pack animals would always follow the strongest. No matter how many times the Sun Guild acted viciously, currently they could only rely on the boy with the sun helmet. What are you saying? Are you saying that there is a light switch? Quickly. Following the boy's shout, people moved their legs. Young quietly clicked his tongue as he looked at the scene. The worst-case scenario. There was a way for no one to die and escape from this place if they had objectively analyzed the situation. If the 300 people stuck together and tied up the 12 who were possessed and left them alone, it could have been solved. However, already one was possessed and the situation was in chaos. He couldn't guarantee that everyone who had different goals would stick together, and now since someone had died already, it would be difficult to get people to stick together. Despite everything, he had hopes on the boy who had the trust of the people, but out of all the choices he chose the worst-case scenario. If they could quickly find the device that could light up the darkness, it would be fortunate, but to do something like this, the library was too big. The more we scatter, the more people will die. People had already started to spread like a malignant tumor. In an instant, the crowd divided and the chaoticness of the situation had increased. Which side do you want to join? I don't want to go anywhere. When Young asked, Susie answered right away. She tightly held on to Young's clothes. Susie had a sense of survival that was greater than anyone else. In other words, it meant that wherever she went, it would be the same result. If that's the case. If he could, he wanted to go the next room by himself, but due to the characteristics of the Sky Library, he needed to complete the first trial to move on to the next. When they complete the trial, the next decision was completely their own to make. To move on to the next trial or to stop there and wait for the door to open in 3 days. Young looked at the boy wearing the sun helmet. A rising star sent by the Sun Guild. He probably didn't enter here to obtain a mediocre skill. However, his inexperience showed. He seemed to have the unique pride only the members of a big guild had. It seems better to just move alone. Young shrugged his shoulders. It was a pointless worry. It was like it was already decided beforehand. He quietly walked ahead. Sticking together was the easiest way, but since everything was disoriented from the start, it seemed wiser for him to look around than to just stand there. Horus, the boy wearing the sun helmet, ground his teeth. He was a famous talent who was even named after the Egyptian sun god. From the list of candidates for the next guild master, he was definitely one of the few who stood out and had a strong military force. Even Horus himself was confident that he wouldn't lose to anyone in the same age group as him. However, Horus wasn't the first in line to be the next guild master. He was always considered to be second in line, and he didn't understand why. Why was it a guy weaker than him? There was a large gap between the two. If they fought, he would win 99 times out of 100. However, the weak guy was considered to be the first in line to be the next guild master. He couldn't accept it. Alexandro Quintart had once said something to Horus who was like this. Alexandro said, "You cannot have the qualifications be a sovereign just because you are strong. Don't be ridiculous. Don't be ridiculous. Strength was power. The authority to have everything was only for the strong." However, Alexandro Quintart was a first generation. He was someone who arrived in the underworld by passing through a gate. On the other hand, Horus was a second generation who was born in the underworld. He let out his first cry in this barren land where the weak and the poor couldn't survive. He believed their values could only be different. Therefore he had volunteered to enter the Sky Library to prove to Alexandro that his belief was true, that strength was everything. I will surely earn the Lineage of Light skill. Of course he had volunteered for another purpose besides this. When he coincidentally entered a room filled with top secrets of the Sun Guild, he found out that there was a skill called Lineage of Light that existed somewhere in the Sky Library. It stated that they only knew of its existence and didn't know the specific location. But the surprising part was that the Lineage of Light was one of the ways to obtain the Throne of the Sun. The Throne of the Sun. The ultimate pinnacle the Sun Guild was striving for. Their goal was to become a Helios who would drive a sun's carriage. If he could just reach the ultimate pinnacle, there would be no one who would hold Horus in disregard. Even Alexandro would quietly give him the position of the next guild master. However, in reality he was at a loss from the beginning. I never thought it would be a spirit that could evolve. The possessed spirits started to slowly gain a consciousness. They approached in a friendly manner and stabbed their backs. It was a talent that ordinary spirits were not capable of. After possessing someone, they would absorb their victim's knowledge and behave like that person. To make matters worse, the time it stayed dark increased. The only way they were able to tell who was possessed was by looking at the number of shadows the person had, but they couldn't even do that properly. Be careful of the people who approach you. We need to move together. About 50 people gathered around Horus. If he could, he wanted to kill everyone and just move on his own, but this wasn't the only trial. He needed to gather as many people he could to move forward. Sheet, how many people have died already? 30 people, I think? It was easy to see corpses were spread all around them. However, it was too difficult to differentiate who was possessed and who wasn't. Eventually, it became a situation where it was hard to tell how many spirits were remaining. There are a sheet ton of books. I just wish I could leave by choosing a random skill. While moving between the corpses, people looked through the bookshelves. Each book was a skill and it looked like there were thousands of books currently arranged. While they were looking, with a thump, someone accidentally touched a corpse lying on the floor with their foot. At that moment, the corpse suddenly opened its eyes and grabbed the man's ankle. Ugh. What is? Gah. The corpse he passed by, whom he thought was dead, chewed off his ankle. It then stood up, picked up a sword and slashed the man's body diagonally. Swoosh. Horus raised his sword and stormed in. In an instant he reduced the distance between the spirit and himself and sliced off the possessed person's neck. However, without any time to be relieved, the man right beside him attacked. Was it too? Oh, it wasn't. From acting dead to moving between bodies. Right before he died, the shadow separated himself and moved to the person beside it. It happened in an instant. Blaze. However, blazing wings appeared out of Horus's back and burned the man. A smoky smell spread everywhere and the blazing wings hid their existence as if they didn't exist from the start. Sheet. Horus cursed in his heart. He heard stories about spirit trials, but the one that he needed to complete seemed to be the worst one among them. He needed to quickly turn the lights on. There had to be a device somewhere to light up the place for a trial like this. Tick. It was at that moment. As if they were being turned on, the lights around them flickered as they became brighter. Horus frowned deeply. Just who? He was planning to start searching for it, but it seemed like someone had already found the switch. It was faster than he thought. It wasn't a bad thing, but for some reason he felt uneasy about it. Creak dash. Thump. Thump. He could hear doors opening from here and there. However, Horus's expression didn't relax. Muyang moved according to the direction the spirits moved in. The spirits were spread sparsely apart and it looked like they were connected in a single path. Not even the spirits could catch Muyang when he moved in the dark. Muyang was able to arrive at a location by following a simple rule. It's hidden in an easier spot than I thought. One bookshelf. Unlike the other bookshelves, the books on this bookshelf were disarranged. As he arranged the books on that bookshelf, the light came on in the Sky Library. Wow, it got brighter. Satisfied, Muyang moved on. Suzy hurriedly followed him. Muyang stopped for a moment and spoke. Are you planning on entering the next room? Can't I follow you? If you're going to pick a skill, you can stay here. That is, I don't want to be here alone. Susie was the type that easily felt lonely. It was most likely because she was young, but she wasn't a bother in this current situation. Besides, Susie's sense was quite useful. Finding this bookshelf was partly due to Susie. Also, Muyang thought that if Susie could obtain a good skill, it could help Taehuan to establish himself as a sovereign. Was it because he killed numerous heroes in the past? Muyang wanted to see even a glimpse of a person who could be considered as a true hero work his way up from the bottom. Even if their paths were different from the path Muyang tread. Don't bother me and just follow. I accept your orders. Susie foolishly laughed and continued. In the past, my dad used to always say this to my mom. Don't speak useless words. Yes. Susie weakly pouted her lips and Muyang cold-heartedly turned his body. It was unfortunate, but Muyang was an opponent who couldn't take jokes. The people who were satisfied with the low-ranked room decided to stay. Around 50 people. They were either people who were satisfied with the skill they obtained or thought, if the low-ranked room was like this, how much harder would the mid-ranked room be? And gave up. However, those who had joined a group couldn't give up now even if they wanted to. What group would have invested in a beginner for them to only learn a skill from the low-ranked room? Since they had already accepted so much, it was impossible to turn back now. As there was no group that would take a loss and accepted a useless person. They would obviously try to gain more than what they have invested. If they gave up, it would be hard to see anything good come out of it. Anyways, the only way the people who had already joined a group could relax was when they obtained the skill they needed from the Sky Library or died. Those were the words that appeared as soon as they entered the mid-ranked room. The difficulty has gone up. Muyang nodded his head. There was no way that the difficulty would be the same as the low-ranked room, but steel dolls, was it? The original number of spirits had more than doubled and another variable was added in. However, his eyes focused on the condition that was announced about the dolls. It won't be easy. Both the shadow spirits and the steel dolls were very difficult to deal with. Especially the steel dolls, who were almost impossible for beginners with every stat less than 100 to defeat, were a distinct monster only the Sky Library possessed. It was hard against one type. However, two combined together. Of course, due to the characteristics of the shadow spirits, they were easier to deal with as a group, but since the steel dolls would indiscriminately attack their target, they were in a dilemma. To move alone or move together. It wouldn't be as easy to complete as the low-ranked room. Despite everything, it's fortunate that there aren't too many of them. There were only 5 steel dolls. It was essential to play tag. The most effective method was to eliminate the shadow spirits once the lights came on and then move alone. Everyone who could level-headedly look at the situation would have made the same conclusion. They might not have made it yet, but it was only a matter of time. It seems a bit cold. Susie blew hot air into her hands. The lights would come on and off every 3 seconds. Large bookcases stretched across the walls on either side and countless books were placed on the shelves. Although the layout wasn't different from the low-ranked room, the only difference was the temperature. Though there was no wind, the temperature of the room itself was low. Humidity. Due to that, the humidity of the room rose. Even if the books were protected with preservation magic, there was no way this wasn't strange. Being dry was a basic practice of storing books. Muyang immediately approached the bookshelf and stretched his hand to check the conditions of the books. It looks like humidity-maintaining magic was cast as well. Unlike their surroundings, the books and bookshelves had no traces of water. Was he wrong? When he slowly examined the bookshelf, he found an especially dark-colored book. It's different. The book was wet. He took it out and checked the book cover. There was only a single circular symbol drawn on the cover. Keep it. Is it okay to take them out as we please? It's okay as long as you don't learn it. Mister, I will be a great porter. Susie energetically received the book Muyang handed her. Unlike in the low-ranked room, she looked like she had adjusted slightly. It looks like I have to check other places as well. There probably wasn't only a single book like this. It was a small clue, however, if he was to find them, he would be able to complete the puzzle. Muyang didn't become impatient and slowly moved away. What was the standard of being alone? How far of a distance did he have to keep to be considered alone? The steel dolls were big. A large build that stood 2.5 m tall. With a nose as long as Pinocchio's, they were human-shaped monsters. However, unlike their appearance, they were very agile. If there was more than one person, they would most certainly appear and only disappear after one was left. If you stood still because you were stricken with fear, then you would become food for the shadow spirits. They aren't retaliating. Muyang kept far away from Suzy and was progressively experimenting with the steel dolls. First, he believed that the standard for being alone was about 200 m. And if you attacked when you were alone, they would not retaliate. But their defense was very high. Even Muyang's attacks weren't able to easily damage them. Anguish was a sword made to kill living creatures. It wasn't able to penetrate the non-living steel doll's outer layer. It's not to the point of being impossible. Muyang was one as well as multiple. The Prince and the Avengers, the Blazing Spear Soldier and the Sorceress of Lightning. It was impossible by himself, but if many attacked at once, there was a chance to win with a significant reduction in losses. Tens of undead with overlapping buffs attacked one. The steel doll didn't have the ability to endure. The only problem was, were the profits greater than the losses? There is no reason for me to set myself up for losses. However, he shook his head. His decision was simple. He didn't see a big enough advantage. It was instead a waste of time. I have to quickly get to the high-ranked room. He only had 3 days. Every time he went up a room, the difficulty would sharply rise. Half a day had already passed. On top of that, the first person to enter the high-ranked room would get preferential treatment. A chance to obtain one more skill. Although it wasn't free, depending on one's effort, they would be given a chance to obtain another skill. There was no reason to waste time here. Muyang waited for the steel dolls to leave before approaching Suzy. "Mister, a shadow's behind you." The moment Suzy called out looking behind Muyang, he lowered his position and locked Suzy into his armpit. A shadow spirit had quickly followed him as soon as the steel doll had left. There was only one way to eliminate a shadow spirit. Only after letting it possess someone could he reduce their numbers. 2 shadow spirits were stubbornly following behind Muyang. They aimed for Muyang's feet from the opposite direction the steel doll left towards. He was soon able to discover a group. "Don't come near us. If you do, we will atta." They menacingly raised their weapons as soon as they saw Muyang, but Muyang looked like he didn't care as he passed by them. Soon after, the 2 shadow spirits chasing Muyang changed their targets. "It's a shadow. Gah." He put the screams behind him and continued onwards. Another steel doll approached them from a different direction. It was difficult to separate themselves suddenly when they had already been registered as 2. Muyang increased his speed. Then Suzy let out a sigh as if she had given up. "They said that you're not supposed to carelessly touch a lady." As soon as Horace entered, he immediately ran towards the high-ranked room entrance and checked the condition. Because of that, the number of people had been reduced by 10, but he didn't care. "I should have done this from the beginning." It was possible to check the necessary conditions to move to the next room this way. It seemed like if they progressed with the premise of sacrificing people, they were able to quickly and more easily enter the next room. "I guess I can easily get the first admission bonus." A bonus that would let someone obtain another skill. Any large guild would most likely know this information. It was the reason why the Sun Guild only allowed Horace to enter. It was a certain agreement to let everyone get the bonus without overlapping. Anyways, what are OS? Although he had confirmed the condition, he didn't know what the condition was referring to. Horace randomly looked around at his surroundings and soon found a book with an O on a bookshelf. Look for wet books on the bookshelves. After Horace sent out an order, people started to move. The strongest person was Horace, and he even had the Sun Guild's support. However, each of their thoughts were different. To move to the high-ranked room, they needed 5 books. No one believed Horace would take care of everyone. On the contrary, didn't he sacrifice people? Although they decided that it would be safer than moving alone and they couldn't leave because they didn't want to step into the unknown, everyone was busy looking out for their own profit. If they found a book with an O, they would conceal it, and if they found the skill they wanted, they would secretly return to the low-ranked room. Horace greatly punished those people whenever he spotted them. Bastards who hide the books after finding them will die. Bastards that run will die. He swung his sword. Without a moment of hesitation, a head flew off. Submission to power. People were scared. It was when they had gathered 4 books. It's heavy. My shoulders hurt. Endure it. Horace discovered a party of 2. A young girl and a man were running around together. The most surprising thing was that the young girl groaned while carrying what looked to be about 10 books. What the hell are those 2? Horace couldn't help but doubt his eyes. The steel dolls and shadow spirits were monsters that made even Horace nervous. There was no way that avoiding monsters while finding books would be an easy task. But they already had 10 books. And with only 2 people, they were probably lucky. It didn't make sense. Horace was always the best. Although he wasn't the #1 candidate for the next guild master, his pure abilities were better than anyone else. A person like him leading a large number of people could only gather 4 books, so it was impossible for 2 people to have already gathered 10. But, as soon as people gathered, steel dolls appeared. Horace indicated 2 people near him. Go. Pardon? Grab the steel doll's attention. I don't want to. If you don't go, you will die by my hands. Swoosh. Horace raised his sword. Horace had not lied until now. He had already killed 5 people that actually refused his orders. Eventually, in front of the tyrant's acts of violence, the 2 chosen people grudgingly moved. However, there wasn't only a single steel doll. Suddenly 3 stood in their way. Just where? He could understand one, but the other 3 came from the same direction. They were moving together as if it was already prearranged. It was the first time 3 moved together. A desperately dangerous situation. It looks like those dolls followed us. But why are they attacking those people? A man and a girl briefly watched Horace without care and passed by as if nothing happened. Horace, who had heard the girl's words, couldn't help but distort his face. That bastard and B*TH are the ones who dragged the steel dolls here. No wonder it was weird for 3 of them to move together. Now that he looked at it, it seemed that they followed the 2 here. Then they spotted Horace's large group and prepared for combat. What do we do now? You guys think about that yourselves. Horace couldn't help but be nervous. The path was blocked and it seemed like the only way to live was to become the last one standing. Because if he was the only one remaining, the steel dolls would no longer attack. The only way was to endure until the rest had all died. It was pitiful, but it was the best decision he could make. I will definitely kill those 2. Horace ground his teeth as he gazed at the direction the man and the girl had disappeared to. The bonus was only given to 1 person. Young completed the condition and was the first to step into the room. At the same time, another phrase appeared. Ko. They were only the size of a small child, but they were monsters that possessed sharp claws and wings. Thousands of harpies were roaming around in the air. The bookshelves were in disarray, so there were many places to hide, but it was impossible to hide for 24 hours. However, Young revealed a small smile. It's a good chance to make flying undead. To Young, danger was the same as a chance. The flying-type monsters only existed in specific areas and they didn't exist around the great city. However, if he made a flying undead in advance, there could be many places where it could be useful. Of course, harpies had too many flaws to be considered strong monsters. Not only were they small, they lacked individual fighting power. However, they lived in flocks and possessed a decent paralyzing poison. The poison resided in their feathers, and by throwing their feathers like darts, they were able to paralyze their prey. The harpies were the type of monsters that would swarm in with overwhelming numbers to fight for meat and would not leave a single trace of it on their victims' bones. A good 5,000 harpies. He estimated with a glance, but it seemed pretty close. Young hid his body in a shady area under a bookshelf. Susie followed right behind him with her hands covering her mouth. Since her figure was already small, she wasn't the type to stand out even without the use of stealth abilities. Like this, normal people would move from a bookshelf to another to avoid harpies' eyes and protect their lives. Normally, trials like this were probably made on the premise that people would hide. Young lowered his body and took out a dagger as he moved slowly. When it said that the library's structure had been changed, it meant that there was a space provided somewhere for the harpies. Young's primary goal was to raid that location and make harpies into undead. Fighting many mediocre opponents was a golden opportunity for necromancer-type classes to shine. However, necromancer was a secret class. For example, Muyang possessed a lord class. That meant that an incredibly limited number could act the way Muyang did, and even that was impossible without strong determination. Either way, the Sky Library was a place people couldn't enter if one of their stats were over 100. None of the challengers could move freely facing thousands of harpies. As expected, there was a pond in a corner of the room. About a dozen harpies were in a line drinking water. "Stay here," Muyang mouthed and gestured to Suzy. As if she was nervous, she nodded her head. A single mistake could produce a fatal result. There was no way Suzy didn't know this with her keen sense of survival that was better than anyone else. Muyang picked up a small rock nearby and threw it as far as he could. Plop, plop, ko. Like a crow, they gave out a loud cry and flew towards the sound. They only sounded similar. Harpies had a lower level of intelligence than the crows. Before he knew, only 5 harpies were left paddling in the pond. Taking advantage of the timing, he took out 5 small daggers from his side. It was one of the items he bought in the great city to prepare for assassinations. He held a dagger after placing 4 down. By adjusting the speed and the timing of his throw, he needed to make sure that all 5 would collapse almost at the same time. It was a highly advanced problem for Muyang in his current state. If it was him in the past, he would have been able to shoot out the daggers like flowing water and could have ended it before any of the 5 could react. However, Muyang objectively accepted the fact that his current body was different from the body he had in the past. First, slowly. Swoosh. The dagger was well sharpened. Once it made contact with the harpy's skin, it would easily rip into it. The dagger was thrown upwards as it flew in an arc. The second one gently. He instantly picked up another dagger and stretched out his hand. He crouched even lower as he shot out the dagger. And so, that was how 5 daggers all flew at different speeds and angles towards their targets. Swoosh, swoosh. Almost at the same time. The 5 harpies all died in an instant as their necks and heads were pierced. Wow. Behind him, Suzy's small admiration flowed out. It was like watching the circus on a television or a movie. However, the quality of his actions was different from that of a Pierrot's. It was like watching a true master of daggers that exceeded those in the Chinese opera. Although she knew that she had to be quiet, the young Suzy couldn't stop herself from making a remark. After recognizing her mistake, she quickly covered her mouth. Fortunately, it didn't seem like the harpies on the ceilings noticed her. Afterwards, Muyang stretched out his hand and used the Art of Death skill. A dark aura flowed out from his hands and headed towards the 5 dead harpies. Swish. The dead harpy awkwardly lifted its body. Soon after, all 5 harpies came back to life in an awkward posture. Maybe it was because he used his skill from afar, but the harpies didn't heal at all. However, they were still useful in creating a confusion. Go. Harpies were the type of monsters who lived in groups. They probably never had been attacked by their group members, especially those who were turned into undead. As expected, the harpy flock became confused when the 5 harpies attacked. Tens of them tangled together and the paralyzing poison permeated into their scars. Their weapons, which they had to protect themselves, became a weapon that would take their own lives. One after another, the number of harpies that dropped onto the floor increased. Like a shadow, Muyang secretly approached the paralyzed harpies, stopped their breathing and diligently moved his hands to use the Art of Death skill. I don't think I can make too much. Muyang lightly clicked his tongue. The Art of Death skill was currently a C rank skill. In the beginning, when it was an F rank, he barely had the strength to use it a few times. Now, after increasing the rank a few times, he was able to use the skill more freely than in the beginning, but 50 was the limit. Muyang just focused on making undead. If he did that, he was able to use the Art of Death skill double the times he normally could. At last, once he created a 100 undead, the above message appeared. The 100 harpies were recognized as if they were a single undead. I can make it into a talisman. Muyang stuffed in all the created undead into one talisman. He thought that just having a few would be useful, but this outcome was better than he had expected. And the newly created harpy undead were definitely worth the price. It was because the already dead harpies were no longer affected by paralyzing poison. It might be effective if it was a type of paralysis which affected the muscles, but the harpies' poison was a type that affected the brain and nerves. They only had a chance if they used their sharp claws to rip apart their opponent, but because of the great confusion that rose from their own peers attacking them, they weren't able to properly fight back. Muyang made the most of the commotion by taking out a couple of talismans. The Prince and the Avengers, Blazing Spear Soldier and Sorceress of Lighting. Soon, all the undead Muyang possessed were summoned. And as he turned his head, he saw Susie, who was looking towards him with a blank expression. I won't tell anyone. As if she regarded it as secret, she quietly repeated her words. There were rumors behind the scenes that Muyang worked with the dead, but this was the first time she had personally seen this. Especially Fire Dragon Wu and Code, didn't they slay people when they were judges? Their appearance and their mood were slightly different, but she didn't know why they suddenly appeared here. Susie couldn't think any further. Even if Susie was smart, she couldn't do anything about the limitations of her age. Only they gave her goosebumps. I just need to earn the eye of the sky. Muyang didn't care. If he achieved his goal in the Sky Library, it didn't matter if his identity was exposed. Either way, he was planning on leaving the great city. It was necessary to leave the great city to continuously earn things like secret classes and to improve. What should I do? The Blazing Spear Soldier. A conversation was possible with the Fire Dragon Wu, who was turned into an undead when he was still alive. Hunt down every last living bird. I will follow your order. Growl. Blaze. Fire and lightning raged together. It could be said that Muyang cleverly avoided the limits of the Sky Library. Since all the undead Muyang had were extremely strong. The strength of many following a single order was amazing. It wasn't like there weren't people with summoner classes, but the majority earned these things known as classes as they lived their lives in the underworld. It was a special case for Muyang to earn a class so early. More so because it was a lord class. As they finally killed all the harpies in the flock, something unexpected happened. Muyang's body gradually became transparent. Mr. As Susie noticed the change, she tilted her head slightly as she called for him, but Muyang had already disappeared. Muyang realized that this forced send-off was for a reward. However, he was secretly quite surprised. The reason why the long-distance teleportation magical item was an amazing item was because it allowed the user to move to a place they remembered, but also because teleportation was a movement through space. Skills that allowed the user to move through space were rare, and there were barely any items that could do this. However, it teleported Muyang for his reward. Soon the surrounding background slowly changed. Muyang was on top of a place similar to a temple. The temple itself was totally murky, and the whole area was only lit up a bit by a small fire hanging on top of the ceiling. And Muyang was able to find 8 huge statues surrounding the place. A man holding a dragon and a spear, a man in the form of a beast, a bird with golden wings and hair, even a goblin with 3 heads and many long arms. 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. Muyang was certain that the 8 statues had something to do with the 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. Even the name of the room itself was the Room of 8 Ghosts. The infinity pouch emitted a light. As he placed his hand inside, his hand naturally took out a talisman. Talisman of Azura. The talisman he received after clearing the first boss in the Blue Temple. It was given to him when he left a phenomenal record. Muyang was planning on using the Talisman of Azura later on when he obtained the S-ranked weapon Diablos, as it allowed him to strengthen an equipment or a skill. However, right now, the Talisman of Azura shined as it flew out of his hand and was absorbed into the goblin with 6 hands. It was actually a statue modeled after Azura. Thump, thump. Soon Azura moved. Slowly he stretched out his large hand and grabbed Muyang. Afterwards, Muyang locked eyes with one of the 3 heads. Muyang felt like his soul was being sucked in as he looked into his eyes. As the hand moved, he was able to see the rest of the eyes. He felt like he entered a place deep inside an abyss. Lightning raged inside Muyang's head as he looked at all 6 eyes the 3 heads had. He couldn't think about anything. Muyang was able to peek inside the world of horrifying demons and spirits in Azura's 6 eyes. The screams and anguish of 10 billion, 100 billion ringed in Muyang's ears. A place where death was evident. A place that was death itself. Even Muyang, who killed thousands of people, couldn't understand everything in this world. No, it was impossible for a human to understand all 6 places. He just scooped up a very small part, a grain of something. And like a monk who had been enlightened, a light emitted from Muyang's body as he started to float freely. Muyang opened his eyes. Since he already had his eyes opened, it was misleading, but he had awakened to observe the 6 worlds of the devils. A message appeared one step behind. However, Muyang already knew. Though he realized, if he learned this skill, one of his chances of learning a skill from the Sky Library and the Talisman of Azura would be lost, but even if the cost was multiple times that, it would be insignificant in front of the 6 paths. He was captivated by 6 paths' unlimited potential. If he could just fully manipulate the 6 worlds, he could reign as the true king of the devils. He didn't know this when he earned the Death Lord class. While using the skill, he thought of its usefulness and his thoughts had become more positive towards it. However, the 6 paths was different. He couldn't waste this enlightenment. Like dust floating in the air, he was unsure when he would be enlightened or if it had come and left. However, Muyang was confident right now. He didn't know what this enlightenment really was, but he knew it was very beneficial and that he must grab hold of it. It was close to an instinctive desire for strength. I will learn it. Muyang looked straight into Azura's eyes. Azura. He was a figure who was recognized as the bad or the good god depending on the origin. There was a story that once a person collected the 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism, Buddha will descend. It was a classified information that only the 5 great clans knew about, and they believed that the descent of Buddha will be the only way to get rid of all the 72 demon gods and save the world. Was it joking with me? Muyang's eyebrows slightly went up. What do you want, Azura? Muyang tried to understand Azura's motives with his deep gaze. He didn't just give it to anyone. He meant that he would provide enlightenment if one fulfilled a specific condition. Azura's 6 eyes started to shine all at once. I kill Sakra's vassal. And then I will prove how I'm superior. A voice ringed inside his ears. His massive existence also sounded out. Muyang smiled. Sakra was a god who protected the Buddha's teachings and also called the god of dance, Indra. Muyang didn't study a lot about Buddhism, but he knew that the word, Asurajang, originated from the fight with Azura and Sakra. However, from what Muyang remembered, Azura had never won against Sakra. Did he want to win by even using a substitute to fight for him? Sakra was the owner of the Deva, the first character of 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism, Su. Also, they were both converted into gods under Buddha. 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. There was a high chance that the vassal would have something similar to the Talisman of Deva, as he was the first of the 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. He thought it was going to be simple, but it wasn't a simple reward. It was one of the stories that were essential to the creation of this world. He could say that he was following the right path. Is there a way to know who Sakra's vassal is? Muyang spoke with a voice filled with curiosity. It seemed like Azura himself had descended onto his statue. And if he could figure out who Sakra's vassal was, it would allow him to be a step closer in collecting all 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. He was able to get closer to the reason why the 5 great clans were so secretive about it. You will naturally know when you meet him. When you become my vassal, it is your destiny to bump into each other. I will prove that I'm most superior among the 8 Deva. He couldn't tell who the vassal was. But from how Azura spoke, it seemed like the vassal was already in the underworld. The owner of the heavens. If it was someone Sakra had personally selected, that person wouldn't be ordinary. It had to be someone who was in or close to the top 10 humans, or one of the strong who wasn't known yet. Since the underworld was large, that there was still a possibility that there was someone strong who wasn't well known. As of now, Muyang couldn't do anything. Muyang's fighting strength was completely different than that of a beginner's, but there was still a large gap compared to the people who have established themselves in the underworld for 50 years. At most 10 years of fighting experience. It was an extraordinary development because it had only been less than 2 months since he had returned, but this was only when he gave it his all, including all his undead. He did massacre the 5,000 harpies, but that was only because harpies weren't powerful monsters. and there was a significant amount that died in the confusion as they cut through each other's wings to kill each other. In short, they destroyed themselves. Either way, even if it was like this, Muyang alone fell short by 10 years. From the start, if a person survived 10 years of the underworld, it meant that the person had that much skill. Even if a person could live safely around the city, the variables of the underworld could not be ignored. Even if Muyang said, at most, they were not opponents to be taken lightly of. They could only adapt to all sorts of circumstances, unlike the rising stars who grew up protected. Since Muyang's irregular attacks didn't really work on them, it was hard to say anything above that. But it was still okay. Azura never gave him a deadline. It meant that he just needed to complete the condition someday. Muyang slowly opened his mouth. I will kill Sakra's vassal for you. That was enough. He wanted to ask him in detail, but Azura's eyes slowly lost their light. He felt like he needed to reply before the light disappeared. He wasn't too sad. It was enough that he grabbed hold of a hint on collecting all the 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. Whoosh. Right after Muyang replied, a strong gust of wind blew. Azura's hand was holding Muyang's body tightly. Hiya. Zehawewa. All kinds of malice and screams stirred up his soul. Muyang's vision was blocked and his eyes turned black. An image intense as lightning. Inside that image there was a world. Only crazy devils existed on Azura path. The moment he glanced it, Muyang lost conscious. Ister mister. Slap. Someone was violently slapping Muyang's cheeks. Muyang opened his eyes. He saw a lot of clocks in Susie's relieved face. Phew, I thought you were dead. Muyang lifted his body. Where are we? It was different from what he saw after he completed the high-ranked room and was about to enter the room of 8 ghosts. This was a different place as no dead harpies were lying on the floor. As Muyang asked, Susie thought for a moment and spoke. It said this was the top-ranked room. All of a sudden the room changed and it became like this. The room itself had changed. It seemed like the high-ranked room had moved to the top room right away. However, no trial was given. The surroundings were silent and Susie was already holding a book. Lineage of Light. Muyang thought he heard it before. He couldn't remember the exact details, but he thought he caught a glimpse of that name among the top-ranked skills. And before Muyang knew, a book was placed on top of his body. Eye of the Sky. He didn't even choose it yet, but how was it already found? He didn't even tell Susie. If Susie even found this with her senses weren't only good, but she was born with mind-reading abilities. It was impossible unless she peeked in his heart. Did you bring it? Susie shook her head as Muyang looked at her with doubtful eyes. It just appeared when we entered. And there is no way to move around in here. It kept saying how you can leave when you learn the skill. It meant that Susie just didn't learn her skill yet because she didn't want to leave this place without Muyang. Maybe this was why information about the top-ranked room was limited. Information about the top-ranked room was one of the top secrets of every group. As Muyang only learned information through other people's status viewers, he didn't have exact information. The histories only offered what they learned from the top-ranked room, and no details about what was there and what devices were there were given. It seemed like it gave away what the person wanted the most or what it believed was best suited for the person. In fact, there were no books or bookshelves near them. All it had were all different kinds of clocks. This was why information about the top-ranked room was limited even if people wanted to know more about it. It was worth handling it as top secret. Muyang held the book. Afterwards, as he slowly opened it, he felt like the book was being sucked into his body. With this, he learned 2 skills from the Sky Library. He turned his status viewer to check information about them. Skill title, 6 Paths, the First Path. Description. The enlightenment of the 6 worlds the spirits and the devils live in have been placed inside. When you overcome the first path, the world of awareness will increase and you will be able to step inside another world if you overcome the first path. When you capture spirits and devils into the world of awareness, the characteristics and power will change depending on their type. The descriptions of the 6 paths are written below. Azura Path. The world of crazy Azuras where they always fight. Hell Path. Preda Path. Animal Path. Human Path. Deva Path. Skill title, Eye of the Sky, F. Description. An all-inclusive skill about the information inside the sky library. As you increase your rank, the amount you can see increases. The 6 paths in the eye of the sky. He was still unable to picture what kind of skill the 6 paths was at all. It seemed like he needed to reinforce the skills with, to know. On the other hand, Muyang knew a lot about the skill eye of the sky. You can read the skill or the equipment your opponent is using. The man with 108 eyes, Golem. He was the one with the most observation type skills. And out of the skills, eye of the sky was the most special skill. And as it had a broad spectrum of uses, he used it extensively. Muyang found out about this skill through the assassination of Golem, but when he thought about the situation back then, he smirked. The process took a good 6 months. Because Golem avoided all the traps and stakeouts to protect himself. Muyang remembered that he wasn't very powerful, but he was very particular. Muyang had to use his pure abilities to oppress him as he dodged most of the skills. An achievement effect has also been added. If his eyes weren't wrong, there was really another effect added. He checked it right away. Achievement effect dash. Gremmary's Anguish, A, +3 to all abilities. Soulmate B+. From now on, if you commune with an undead, the undead stats will slightly increase permanently. Azura's Vassal, A, the strength to deal with spirits and devil's power. Spirit ability increased by 10. Class effect dash. Death Lord, Lord class, ruler of death. Class effect dash none. Strength 80 54 plus 26. Agility 71 53 plus 18. Stamina 77 49 plus 28. Intelligence 48 30 plus 18. Wisdom 48 30 plus 18. Fighting Aura 50 32 plus 18. Magic Resistance 30 12 plus 18. Spirit Ability 38 10 plus 28. Special note. Fighting Aura has been awakened. Equipped and invoked equipment. Anguish, Strength +5. Herculean Strength Leather Armor, Strength +3. Lunatic Sovereign's Set, all stats +15, Stamina +10. Spirit Ability. A distinct stat had been found. Looking at how it was classified as an A rank, the Spirit Ability seemed to be the main stat for the 6 paths skill. Meanwhile, his stats had greatly improved, and as he gained what he wanted, he could say he was progressing smoothly. Mr. B, but your head? I think something has changed. Then Susie moved a step back. Muyang frowned. What did she mean by changed? If there was a change, then it could only be because of one reason. 6 paths. Could only the result of the enlightenment of the crazy worlds devils lived in. However, Muyang couldn't tell what had changed. Since she specified it was his head, that meant that most of the changes happened on some part of his head. As he lifted up his hand to touch his head, he could feel something. As Muyang completely wrinkled his face, he looked at himself using the back of his status viewer. This. Even Muyang couldn't help but be a little surprised. His hair turned completely white. A horn was created. 1. Asurajang means chaos, mess, madhouse, turmoil in Korea. I'm not sure if it is true, but I think the author mentions it because it sounds like Azura. 2. The first character of 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism is, which means Deva or heavenly. As if it was letting its presence known, it stood up right in the middle of his head. Although the size wasn't big, it seemed like it changed along with his hair color. Goblin King. As Muyang looked at himself from the status viewer, a sudden thought came to him. Only the Goblin King could have this type of horn and white hair. For a moment, Muyang was lost in his thoughts. Was it because he became Azura's vassal, which could be said as the peak of all devils? His current appearance was too eye-catching. If he went out like this, it would attract attention. A few groups would try to figure out what skills he learned in the Sky Library, and there was a highly likely chance that a problem would occur in the process. But no matter how hard he pressed on his horn, it wouldn't go in. I might figure something out if I use Azura Path. The 6 paths was the reason for this change. As of now, Muyang could only use Azura Path. He could only move to the world of crazy spirits and devils. However, it didn't seem like it was possible to use it now. I need a catalyst. He instinctively knew that a spirit or a devil was needed. And Muyang knew a place which had one of the two. The low-ranked room and the mid-ranked room. The shadows in that place were considered as spirits. Mr. It is you, right? Before he knew it, Susie cautiously asked after learning lineage of light. Looking at Susie's cautiousness, Myung coldly answered. From now, go out alone. Me alone. Myung gazed into Susie's eyes. First, he was planning to do whatever he could in the 3-day time frame he was given. So it wasn't good for Susie to be with him. As the skill was out of the ordinary, Myung was unsure if he would be able to control its destructive nature like the Avengers and would destroy everything around him. And most importantly, Myung had already achieved all his goals in the great city. Instead of going out and making people suspicious, it might be better to have them think he was dead and use the long-distance teleportation magical item. Since the investigation about Fire Dragon Wu was going to end soon, there was a high chance that it would waste his time. There was a chance he would get chased by large groups one after another if he didn't straighten things out, including his appearance. Mister, you're not going anywhere, right? Susie couldn't hide the anxiety in her voice as she spoke, but Myung pointed his finger towards a place. If you go towards the middle of the clock tower, you will be summoned out of the Sky Library. Wait for me outside. A perfect clock tower stood surrounded by other clocks. That was the exit. The door that was only set up in the top-ranked room. Must I really go? Go. Susie's eyes were filled with tears as Myung heartlessly cast her away. I'm sorry I was surprised earlier. I won't bother you and just have my mouth shut. I will walk stealthily like a cat too. Myung frowned. It seemed like Susie realized that Myung was planning on leaving her. However, Susie's reaction was a bit unexpected. The time they had spent together was only a bit more than a month. And it wasn't like Myung was good to her. Myung only gave back what he received, like compensating for the amount of work. He didn't show any favoritism or affection. He didn't even know how to give those. He never expected that what he gave would give him trust and affection in return. At least for Myung, those two words were very unfamiliar to him. From now on, I won't cry and work harder. I will work harder so. Susie bit her lips. She thought that with Myung's personality he wouldn't like to see her cry. And this was a reasonable reaction in her position. The only person who accepted her father and herself. He was the first person to acknowledge her when everyone else avoided them, thinking they would only be a bother. Myung was the one who appeared like a hero in most perilous situations. Myung was an existence greater than a savior, a rock, an idol and hero to Susie. There was a time when she thought he might have been a god. He knew everything. He had the answers to everything. And all those things saved Susie's life. He was close a guardian. She was unable to suppress her feelings of sadness when she felt like her guardian was leaving her. Myung gave her a talisman. Take this. This. It's the talisman of Emperor of the Shrew Mice. The Emperor of the Shrew Mice, King. It did help in its own way, but after learning the skills here, there wasn't much use for it anymore. He could do most things that King could with an undead. It was a thing that he didn't want, even though it wasn't as useful. Susie wiped her tears and looked at Myung. You must return this to me, since I treasure this a lot. Wait for me outside. After receiving the talisman, Susie looked back and forth at Myung and the talisman before she firmly nodded as if she had resolved herself. Eventually she started to move her legs and walk towards the clock tower. While she walked, she didn't forget to constantly turn around to look back at Myung. If you don't come, I will throw it away. She firmly spoke before she passed through the door. The surrounding instantly became completely quiet. Consideration. Myung chuckled as he thought of that word. Although he believed that all his emotions had died off after living as a puppet for 40 years, it seemed like that wasn't so. As if parts of his nature that were sealed for 40 years were starting to pop out little by little. Maybe he was a person with a bit of consideration for others before he was kidnapped by the Forest of Death. What he did for a living and with what kind of mindset he had lived his day-to-day life. He was curious, but that was all. No matter how hard he tried, nothing came to his mind. It was like a wind he could never grasp. Myung then shook his head. Potential to become a hero. Like Taehwan, Susie also had the potential to become a hero. However, as she was still too young, he didn't have high hopes for her. It was easy for someone so young to change. Her consciousness wouldn't have been fully developed yet. Therefore, it was hard to figure her out with just 1 or 2 months. There was a high chance that she could turn out to be a completely different person as she gotten older. It was because unlike Taehwan, who could think and walk his own path as an adult, Suzy was at an age where she was weak to surrounding temptations. Anyone will be tempted. A top-ranked skill and a secret class. Especially the Valkyrie of Dawn melted the surrounding people's hearts. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't stop it. It was like an all in his pocket. If he wasn't going to stay beside her and protect her forever, it was right to just leave her. Since he was busy to move on his own, he didn't have time to take care of her. But for that slight chance that it could happen, he decided to invest. It really wasn't much of an investment, but we all need to walk our own path. Even if she would walk a different path than Myung, he could only hope that she wouldn't walk the path the established people in the underworld did. If they steadily walk their own path, they would meet someday. He shook his head and cleared his thoughts. Let's go. It was time to make his last inspection. The shadow spirits in the mid-ranked room quickly approached Myung as they discovered him. As he looked at the shadow spirits, his eyes turned white and they unexpectedly became ghastly. Come. Myung already knew how to handle spirits and devils. He didn't avoid the spirit that was approaching him and grabbed hold of it with his hand. Surprisingly, the shadow spirit trembled when it was grabbed by Myung. Slurp. As he placed it inside his mouth, the spirit got sucked in. Gah! The spirit inside his body started to go berserk. Myung's body was connected to one of the 6 worlds, Azura Path. It was a world that would make a weak spirit instantly go crazy. Azura Path didn't completely become mine. I need to increase the number of spirits and devils little by little to rule over them. As the spirit went crazy, Myung could slowly confirm the specifics of Azura Path. There were already a lot of spirits and devils in Azura Path, but they did not listen to his command. He felt their wills were not willing to listen to a weak Azura's words. The only way to rule over them was to increase Myung's own formless monsters and prove his power. And other paths would be available once he conquered the Azura Path. Myung continued to absorb all the spirits until he met a steel doll. I can see it. He could clearly see the spirit controlling the steel doll. It was a spirit a class higher than the shadow spirits. However, the steel dolls didn't attack an enemy that was alone. That condition was a chance for Myung. It was similar to finding gold while walking down the street. Myung didn't hesitate and stretched out his hand to absorb even the spirit of the steel doll. Crack, crack. At the same time, the steel doll cracked and broke apart as it collapsed. Find them. Following Myung's order, the spirits that he had already eaten until now popped out. They didn't have any siblings. Instantly, they spread out to search for the rest of the spirits. The Death Lord allowed him to handle dead bodies. He wasn't able to handle monsters that were spirit types. And so, Myung was able to make all the spirits in the mid-ranked room his in less than 2 hours. All he did was absorb all the spirits, but it was acknowledged as his win. Then a black armor made from an unknown material appeared. It felt more like a leather clothing than an armor, but to know what it really was, Myung's eyes focused onto his status viewer. Name: Shadow Armor. Rank: B+. Classification: A-Keepable Type. Durability: 12,358. Effect: it allows you to teleport to a shadow within your vision 3 times a day. The armor Myung was wearing right now was the Herculean Strength Leather Armor. He was using it because it increased his strength by 3 and had decent durability, but it was low rank. When he wasn't able to find something to replace it, a much better equipment appeared. Shadow Teleportation. He basically gained 3 chances a day to sneak up on an opponent and cut their necks off. This is good. It was an equipment every assassin dreamed of. Not only that, but it seemed like he could use it well in dangerous situations. The slightly low durability was a flaw, but it wasn't bad at all. Without any delay, Myung took off his Herculean Strength Leather Armor and put on the Shadow Armor. Afterwards, as he was about to move to the low-ranked room, he was able to detect people moving from afar. In the middle was Horus. As his path was once blocked by the steel dolls, he seemed to have gathered more people from the low-ranked room. Horus stood in his spot for a while as he looked at Myung. You. Then a smile appeared slowly on Horus's lips. Ha. I wasn't able to recognize you for a while as your appearance had changed. It seems like you have learned a high-ranked skill. Horace was certain that the change in Muyang's appearance was due to a skill he learned in the high-ranked room. It was because he felt a certain ghastliness emitting from Muyang. Just thinking about how great a top-ranked skill would be made him excited. However, Horace didn't know that Muyang had already gone to the top-ranked room and was on his way down. And the fact that Suzy already took the lineage of light skill. Horace's lips wiggled unpleasantly. Good that we ran into you. You dare to steer all the steel dolls and try to kill me? Horace's eyes flared up. He made a resolution that he will kill Muyang when he saw him again, and that chance came quickly. Blazing wings appeared from Horace's back. He took out a sword made of light. He was truly a soldier of the sun. In reality, Horace had the most outstanding abilities among the numerous rising stars of the Sun Guild. He was young, but it wasn't weird to call him a soldier. Confident he was surely going to win. That smirk that looked down on Muyang. Horace continued to mock him. Never ever will you die in peace. You bastard. Horace started to move. No, when Muyang noticed Horace had moved, he was already right in front of him. Got you. Even if the user had learned a high-ranked skill, the user was unable to use it properly if he lacked the ability. It would be boring to finish him with one swift strike, but it couldn't be helped by the overwhelming difference in skills. And when Horace was certain of his win, Horace's blade slightly changed its course, accompanied by an unrecognizable sound. Muyang just stood still, but the sword only brushed past him. He couldn't hit a target right in front of him? That wasn't possible. A sound escaped his mouth as he was taken back. As he turned his doubtful eyes, a small smile appeared on Muyang's lips. It looks like I can use it this way as well. A mental attack using spirits. Shadow spirits could control their victims. Like that, it was possible to use the spirits to limit the movements of his opponents. However, mental attacks wouldn't have much of an effect on those with high intelligence. Since intelligence was related to one's immunity to these attacks, it showed that Horace's intelligence wasn't very high. But he wasn't able to completely control him. Changing the course of his sword was the best he could do. The helmets the members of the Sun Guild wear have a mental defense attribute. Muyang attempted to control Horace's body. If Horace wasn't wearing the sun helmet and Muyang was better at controlling spirits, he would have been successful. He didn't need to control him for long either. Muyang could kill his opponent in a second. I don't know what skill you're using, but it's nothing more than a party trick. As Horace ground his teeth, his sun helmet started to emit a light. Two phrases appeared in front of Muyang's eyes. The Eye of the Sky automatically activated to reveal the changes going on in Horace. 5 minutes of increased immunity. It meant that mental attacks using the spirits would no longer be effective. Not every sun helmet had the same effect. If he was completely immune for 5 minutes, that helmet would be top-ranked among them. Soon after, Horace manipulated space as he rushed towards Muyang. So he knows how to use the blink skill. He raised Anguish and narrowly blocked Horace's sword. Blink was a skill that could be used to teleport short distances. The maximum distance was 2m and it used a lot of magical power, so not many people stubbornly increased its rank. However, Horace was able to use Blink freely. He had an immense amount of magical power and a high degree of skill. Swish. Dash. Horace's attacks were abnormally quick. A second's hesitation would mean his death. Even Muyang couldn't help but be completely tense. Horace could increase the length of his sword of light and could even throw it. However, this also would consume an incredible amount of magical power. For a kid that only looked to be 15 or 16 to have that much magical power and skill. They aren't called rising stars for nothing. Did the Sun Guild have a rising star like that? He seemed to be 2 levels above of Fire Dragon Wu and Code, both whom he had faced before. For someone to be this much above his peers, it meant that he had the talent, effort and support to back it up. It was unexpected for his intelligence to be low compared to that, but he couldn't say that he didn't have great skill. However, even though he was clearly winning, Horace felt something was strange and knit his brows. Horace's continuous attacks stopped. Aren't you a beginner? How can a beginner be my match? Horace was a second generation. He only knew that beginners would spend a month in the temple before coming to the underworld. But it was impossible for them to increase their strength to the point of being able to defeat him in that short period of time. Muyang didn't reply. Instead he became more alert. At most 2 m. The range Horus could blink to. Muyang was currently within it. His neck could fly off at any moment. Horus unconcernedly spoke in a composed voice. Looks like you were strong on that place called Earth. Good. The skilled deserve to be treated as such. I will now fight you as a warrior. He raised his sword and pierced the floor. My name is Horus, the son of the great warrior Almighty and the incarnation of the Sun God. He was named after the Sun God from ancient Egypt. For the Sun Guild to allow that name meant he came from a noble descent. The great warrior Almighty. He was the second most important figure in the Sun Guild. He placed among the top 10 humans in the past and was pushed out due to his age. But he wasn't an opponent you could disregard because of that. There was no one with more experience than him. So he's Almighty's child. He had heard of Horus's name. He had even seen him before, but Horus was too different from his current self that he couldn't recognize him. In the past, Horus was a degenerate. A degenerate without an arm who was addicted to alcohol, drugs and women. He did remember hearing that he used to be incredibly strong even among the rising stars when he was young. I heard he became like that after failing to become the guild master. Alexandro Quintart's prolonged rule. A monarchy was established because of that. The Sun Guild was Alexandro Quintart's castle. He heard that Horus was unable to wait any longer and had lost his arm after challenging Alexandro Quintart. If he wasn't Almighty's son, he would have died that day. Afterwards he became a degenerate. But he wasn't a degenerate right now. Horus, who was currently normal, stared at Muyang as if urging him. Muyang. Muyang. What an unusual name. Then, let's start. Horus was a true warrior. Even though he looked at Muyang with a death stare, he felt excited after acknowledging Muyang's strength. It meant that a fight between the strong brought him that much pleasure. I guess this is much as enough for a teaser. However, Muyang never thought of having a pure one-on-one fight. Objectively, he was no match against him in a one-on-one fight. Horus's abilities weren't something Muyang could currently deal with. Horus was strong enough to place first or second amongst the rising stars. Stubbornly fighting one-on-one was suicide. Slash. Horus's sword sliced through the air once again. However, Horus was able to find Muyang's presence as he turned his body. Shadow teleportation. The effect of the shadow armor. Although it could only be used 3 times a day, it was enough to distract Horus for a moment. Muyang was holding talismans in his hands before anyone realized. The blazing spear soldier, sorceress of lightning, and the prince and the avengers. He brought them all out. In an instant, more than 30 undead were spread around Muyang. You were a corpse sorcerer? Looking at the scene, Horus deeply frowned. His eye reflected feelings of hatred. He believed that true warriors shouldn't manipulate dead people. However, Muyang didn't care. The undead were a part of his strength. See, could that? A total of 60 people were spectating Muyang and Horus's fight. They were originally people Horus had dragged here to complete the mid-ranked room. But one of them let out a shock after seeing Muyang's summoned undead. The Slayer of the Two Tower. How? Flop. A man collapsed. His body was trembling non-stop, and due to the extreme fear he pissed himself. It seemed he was one of the few who had killed 5 and escaped. Although there wasn't anyone who had seen Muyang personally, there were a few that had seen the zombies and the skeleton of fire and ice. And the prince and the avengers were ghoul-type undead. Their size was different, but they looked similar. The man's eyes were locked onto the prince and the avengers as he trembled. There were tens of people who feared death and had killed their comrades to escape the tower. For a person from then to be here. The Slayer of the Tower? Him. That rumor was true? A small commotion. People chattered. If they exited the Sky Library, information about Muyang would spread. I never intended to spare you in the first place. Kill them. It was one of the reasons why he made Susie leave first. Blaze. The blazing spear soldier was the first to move. The long spear was engulfed in flames as he blocked his surroundings. Crackle. As people hesitated, the sorceress of lightning shot lightning bolts down from above. Save me. Please. Please. Ah. The Avengers cleared out the rest. It was a massacre. Young reanimated the corpses and embedded spirits in them. Among them exactly 5 went through a change. The spirits who controlled the steel dolls. As soon as the 5 spirits attached themselves on the newly created zombies, their skin turned into steel. It became a living armor. They truly became steel zombies. Their stats had greatly increased and they had destructive power similar to the Avengers. I guess I can connect them together. He had gained another method for using spirits. In a few minutes, roughly 60 people had all died. They became undead and stood as Young's soldiers. Horus, who was silently observing the scene, said in shock. I have never seen a corpse sorcerer like you. Just who are you? Necromancer was a secret class. As it had never appeared yet, it was obvious that Horus didn't know. Corpse sorcerer was a title given to those that controlled corpses like Jiangshi. 1. But the amount they could control were small and the process was complicated. They were unable to reanimate corpses with a skill like Young. On top of that, those two seem familiar. I think it was called the Next Index. I think I saw them there. Don't tell me you killed them as well. The Next Index were a group of young big shots. He thought he saw them when he attended their group. Young stretched his hand out. Soon around 100 undead charged at Horus. Are you not going to answer? Fine. I will ask again when you are half dead. Horus was confident. A confidence that showed that he would not lose to an unknown man and some corpses. Although he did have the power, Young's undead all possessed a strength that exceeded what they had when they were alive. The sorceress of lightning implanted the lightning rune on the surrounding zombies and steel zombies to strengthen them. Explode. Boom. The bodies of the strengthened zombies inflated. They drooled and their eyes turned red. It was a skill where the body would explode into powder along with the destruction of the enemy. Horus, who looked down on the dead, instantly became stunned. Clang. Even the blazing spear soldier was unable to receive Horus's sword. Although Horus was very strong in one-on-one fights, he wasn't used to fighting many at once. The exploding zombies blocked every direction and the blazing spear soldier wielded his spear in front of him. If he was careless, an Avenger would ride the explosion of the zombie and aim for his neck from above. The sun helmet shined as if it was about to explode. However, his sword was slowly losing its light. No matter how much magical power you had, there was a limit. Swish. Young unsheathed anguish. And he slowly approached him. This doesn't make sense. For these dead corpses to... This isn't a fight between warriors. That's right. It's a fight of life or death. Ugh. Young wielded his sword as he appeared behind Horus using shadow teleportation. Horus was barely able to block it, but he continued to be stunned. Young slightly smiled. A fight between warriors? He had never done that before. Young always stood on the borders of life or death. To Young, living and killing your opponent first was the meaning of a fight. Coward. Fight me fair and square. Horus's sword trembled. He was even panting roughly. Young used his last shadow teleportation to once again appear behind Horus. Fair and square. You couldn't live long if you thought of those things. To fight a monster you had to become more monstrous. Click clang. The sword of light shattered. The wings on Horus's back disappeared. Young expressionlessly gazed at Horus, who fell to the floor. Then he took off Horus's status viewer from his wrist and read his history. Horus was a typical warrior. The top among undead warriors was the Death Knight. Horus was outstanding compared to the materials he had until now, but it was too lacking to create a Death Knight. However, he could probably become a Death Warrior that was ranked just below it. Art of Death. He imagined the shape it would take and cast the skill. Soon a black aura flowed out and covered Horus's body. Plus excellent equipped status. All stats plus 13. Plus can neutralize mental attacks. Plus blink, Sword of the Black Sun, the Wail of the Warrior, Wings of Solar Prominence are usable. Plus strong resistance against dark and light. Plus high defense. A calm smile appeared on Young's lips. Horus was wearing a full black body armor and his eyes exuded the composure of the strong. He was stronger than any undead he had made until now. There was nothing he could ask for since he also had magic resistance. What was more, the art score of 83 was the highest he had gotten until now. There weren't even glaring flaws. He nodded his head in satisfaction and turned him into a talisman before putting him in. Afterwards he took out another talisman. Long-distance teleportation magical item. A magical item that would teleport him to a place he remembered. I will capture Headley's cow from the demon god's territory. He was going to capture Headley's cow when it transforms into a phoenix. It was time to carry out his plan. He had obtained everything he needed here. He even unintentionally obtained a treasure like the Black Sun Warrior. Rip. Muyang ripped up the magical item without reserve. Whoosh. Then Muyang's figure disappeared along with a gust of wind. One Jiangshi is a Chinese hopping vampire, ghost or zombie. Thud. With a loud sound, the doors of the Sky Library opened. However, no one came out. No, technically there was a girl who came out after 2 days. Bei Suzy. A small girl who seemed to be only about 10 years old. And if she came out of the Sky Library before the designated 3 days had ended, that only meant one thing. She earned a top-ranked skill. The top-ranked skills from the Sky Library were all extraordinary. As long as you got one, it allowed you to be above average. Also, she appeared to have broken the record for the youngest contestant so far. The news spread like a wildfire. In a blink of an eye, people started to crowd the entrance of the Sky Library. If it was an average record, it wouldn't have been such a big impact. But it wasn't an average record. It was a situation where people believed Susie's class was also at least above a rare rank. Jackpot. The giants who learned of this all thought the same. It had been a very long time since they had a big-shot beginner like her. Due to this, she was stuck in front of the Sky Library against her will. How did you earn a top-ranked skill? Won't you tell me what kind of skill you learned from there? Did you get easier trials? What kind of trials did you face? Questions flooded in. The large groups were unable to act recklessly as she was getting too much attention. They could have used force if only Susie was older or wasn't a big deal. From the start, not many kids passed through the gate. If there was any less than 5 in a year. The people who settled in the underworld were bound to be a bit sympathetic towards kids who passed through the gate. Since they were kids who came from Earth and not a second generation. Therefore, it would ruin the reputations of large groups if they used force to keep a kid under their control and used her infinite potential for their own. The reason why giant guilds were able to keep their place for tens of years might have been due to their influence, but more so because of their honor and their cause. It was most important for members of large groups to have a sense of pride in their group. Therefore, they used dirty organizations like the Forest of Death to do their dirty work and for it to be completed without any rumors. It was a lot more complicated for them to touch her. And Muyang only told Susie to leave as he was certain that Susie's life would be safe, as the established groups were cowards who had a lot to keep. Anyhow, if anyone was to take Susie in, they would become a hot topic for a while. It was highly likely that she would be able to energize the lifeless city as well as develop into a strong character. The strength of a group relied on how many strong individuals they had. It was better to have one strong person than 100 nobodies. Especially the fighting strength of those who were known as transcendent beings were beyond one's imagination. Normally, a person would be considered a transcendent being if all the person's important stats were above 500. However, it was impossible for a normal person to achieve this, as there would be a wall at every interval of 100. A transcendent being could do the work of 10 strong individuals. If they searched everyone in the underworld, there may be about 50 transcendent beings in total. She has the foundation to become a transcendent being. Susie had the potential to become a transcendent being. As the number of transcendent beings increased, they would gain a strength that no one could disregard, so the large groups couldn't help but covet her. However, it was too late to do anything as she was already the center of attention. They might have been able to do something if Susie only had a top-ranked skill or a class ranked higher than a unique class, but she had both. It was a problem because she had both. More so, many people believed that first generations developed faster than second generations. Who would give up a person who had the potential to become a transcendent being? First, let's wait and see if anyone else will come out of the Sky Library. The representatives of each group made an agreement. However, no matter how long they waited, no one came out. Did they all die? It looks like everyone's dead since no one has come out after all this time. An unprecedented situation. There had never been a case like this in the past 10 years. What exactly happened inside? I don't know. Susie just shook her head. Her face turned pale as if she really didn't know anything. It was because Susie heard people chat about how everyone might have died. That can't be true. A guardian angel couldn't die. If he did, that meant he wasn't an angel. She secretly thought he would always stay nearby, watch out for her and protect her. Mr. Susie touched the one talisman she received. A teardrop fell to the floor. Susie. She's my child. Please move aside. Susie's father and Taehwan, who received the news late, came to see her but were unable to get close. There were a lot of people and it wasn't a situation where a beginner could push their way through. In the center of where people were gathered, the giant groups were having a heated discussion about Susie. The head of Imperial Clan really wants to meet that child. You think only your head will want to? That girl needs to be in our Heavenly Maid clan. Can the other places even raise her properly? With what capability would Heavenly Maid clan have if they aren't even part of the 5 great clans? Know your place before cutting in. Their voices became louder. Although none of the leaders appeared, the people with high standing in each group were present. No one was willing to yield. Then the tall man wearing a sun helmet opened his mouth. Honestly, I don't think it's a matter we can decide on our own. It's a waste of time to continue to this pointless discussion. Instead, why don't we let the girl choose? Certainly that seems to be the best solution. I will give you wealth and fame. They don't know a woman's delicacy. With your skills, you will definitely be the next candidate for the guild master. Depending on how much you try, you can live better than any king. Another competition had started. Susie was confused. She couldn't understand what was going on. They tried to persuade her with different kinds of words, but no place spoke of what she really wanted the most. Where are you, mister? Susie flopped down onto the floor. She closed her eyes and ears. At that moment someone roared. What are you guys doing against one girl? Or, space shook. Only then were they able to see the muscular mysterious man who screamed. The eyes of the people who knew of this mysterious man widened. Why you? Fighting King Lucian. How are you here? Fighting King Lucian. The closest man to the top 10 individuals of humanity. Only looking at fighting strength, he didn't lose out to any for the current top 10. He chuckled. I'm the king. Who dares stop the path of a king? That was right. He wasn't called the Fighting King simply because he was good at fighting. Like a king, his words contained power. Even if he was banned from all the cities, because he was a king, he was able to go wherever he wanted. I've spent days and sleepless nights because I thought someone interesting had shown up. But you guys still running around and doing such shameless things. Tisk tisk. Lucian clicked his tongue. Someone from the temple had broken his record. He had come because he was curious what the person looked like, but there was only a commotion. Then the man with a sun helmet approached him and slightly bowed his head. Fighting King, this is the great city. Even if the strength of the Fighting King has reached the sky, you cannot start a commotion here. Commotion. Lucian laughed as he found it ridiculous. And spoke. If you really don't want me to start a commotion, fuck off. Nash. The man with a sun helmet ground his teeth. It was a king's power that the Fighting King had. The thing people called the words of a king, and the words of an emperor. After a surprising event occurred. The man started to move away from Lucian. I feel like getting rid of all of you, but since it gets annoying when people with big asses show up, I'm going to stop here. I won't do such things to a child no matter how crazy I am. In other words, he meant that they were crazier than him. Then Lucian approached Susie. And just held her wrist. Indeed, you really are worth coveting. Lucian nodded as if he seemed interested after learning about her physique in an instant. As he was an initiate who learned traditional ancient martial arts, he had the ability to know a person's potential just by feeling the person's pulse. The skill Susie had was top class. It wasn't just the skill or class. Her physique was outstanding. Child, can you stand up? Who are you, Grandpa? Susie opened her eyes and looked at Lucian, and she asked after noticing the unexpected change. I am a person known by others as the Fighting King. Anyways, weren't you scared? I wasn't scared at all. Mr. will scold them all. Mr.? Who's that? That's... Susie tightly clenched her lips and shook her head. Lucien was surprised by this. She defied my words? His words always contained power. Even if it wasn't intentional, it would naturally be expressed. But young Susie defied him. Lucien stretched his hand and placed it on top of Susie's forehand for a moment. I have no intentions of hurting you. But I'm a bit curious. Could you tell me who this Mr. is you're referring to? And no. It was almost a reflexive reaction. Lucien knew of the reason for this type of reaction. Someone has implanted a safeguard. And the only people who could implant this kind of subconscious safeguard was himself and one other person. The King of Shadows. Lucien trembled for a moment in excitement. Finally, I found a clue. Lucien had been looking for a certain man regarding something for quite some time. No one knew of his existence, only Lucien knew. The bastard who ran the huge assassin organization called the Forest of Death, and deceived others in the shadows. He's been following him for more than 40 years and still wasn't able to find a single clue. But a clue had appeared in an unusual place. Of course, the defense mechanism was a bit lacking compared to him, but it seemed certain that this Mr. was related to him in some way. He couldn't let this opportunity pass by. This place isn't good. He needed time to break through the defense mechanism to find out the truth. Lucien made his decision before he spoke. I will take you to a safe place. How does that sound? If it's necessary, I will even teach you the skills necessary to survive. At least it would be better than this place. My dad, we need to take my dad. Susie's instinct was crying out loud that she had to follow him to live. But Lucien shook his head. Just you. I can't be certain if we will survive if it's more than 2 people. If those old monsters got off their asses, one of the 2 will definitely die. Then I don't want to go. You don't want to go? You can't. Going with me is safer than this place. Lucien persisted. It was unlike for the Fighting King to act this way, but Lucien wasn't normal in the first place. He really wanted the clue, and even he couldn't help but covet over Susie's potential. People who were watching his actions started to raise their weapons. Fighting King. Are you really planning on becoming our enemy? Don't think you can just walk away after starting a commotion like this. The Fighting King frowned. Move aside, weaklings. Crack. The ground beneath him cracked every step he took. The ground shook and even the air pressure had changed. The people who weren't prepared fell to their knees. Child, don't worry. If he is alive, I will make sure you meet him again. I never go back on my word. Lucien had always done things his way. It wasn't different this time. As he gently pressed his hand on Susie's forehand, Susie fainted and closed her eyes. After placing Susie on his shoulder, he stomped on the ground. He started to quickly leave the great city after he jumped high in the air. Susie's father, who was looking at the whole situation from afar, lifted his head, but the 2 had already disappeared. It was a daylight kidnapping. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The hell horse got mad. Muyang didn't seem like he would ever use a favor. But it never expected Muyang to vanish like that. It would be its greatest disgrace if Muyang died in a random place. Even if he didn't like Muyang, it had to finish its contract. Nay. He cried out loud. Bang. Clash. Numerous lightning bolts fell down all around the hell horse. He was still able to know the location of Muyang as they were connected through a contract. Though it was a place very far from here. The hell horse resolved itself to fly as fast as it could through the air to reach Muyang before he got into trouble. Muyang opened his eyes. As he looked around, it really was the place he remembered. Black sky, black clouds, black sun, and a dead wasteland. Huge black mountains were erected all around him. The demon god's territory. A location barely touched by a human. The location where people would only find and start exploring in about 5 years. Muyang quietly nodded. I have arrived faster than I've expected. He looked around. In this wasteland there was a material he had to take before anyone else. Headley's cow. A unique fairy that could transform into any shape and could possess all the stats its target had. When Headley's cow's life was at risk, it would transform into a phoenix and escape. The phoenix was a mirage rank monster. It was extremely rare and just as strong. However, the phoenix headless cow transforms into something Muyang could definitely catch. It would be the best material if only he could get it. First, I need to figure out where exactly it is. He was certain that headless cow would be here in 5 years but was unsure if it was here now. So he had to first survey his surroundings and figure out who the ruler of this area was. As it was a demon god's territory, if he accidentally met a strong monster he could lose his life. Currently, Muyang's strength was only considered average. Crows the size of a man's chest were flying around the mountains. Blood. He also smelled a thick scent of blood. Muyang slowly moved towards the place reeking of blood. Grr. An incomparably large black dinosaur-like monster let out a cry. In front of it were giants covered in flames which grabbed the dinosaur's neck and were toying with it as they burned its whole body. The black dinosaur was a high-ranked monster known as the Aquatora. It had a fierce and aggressive temper and a tendency to hunt for fun, so it was the culprit in destroying the surrounding ecosystem. The Aquatora was a creature at the top of the food chain, but it was currently the one being hunted. It couldn't even fight back. It had no choice. The giants covered in flames were the bane of living creatures. Fire Tar. A giant of flames. With a height of 10 m, they were the top among the high-ranked monsters. Although there weren't many, they were a warrior tribe that lived in harsh conditions with a lifespan of 1,000 years. The 5 fire tars who were toying with the Aquatora broke its neck and made their hands sharp as knives to skin the beast. They then roasted the meat and ate it. The flames of the fire tar would only burn their enemies. Is this the territory of the fire tars? Muyang, who gazed at this scene from afar, couldn't help but become nervous. If this was the fire tar's territory, then it would become a huge restriction on his movements. First, unlike their size, the fire tar were agile and sensitive. It was difficult for Muyang to escape at his current level. Even with the help of the hell horse, there was a limit. What to do? He couldn't beat the fire tars right now. Even with the help of all his undead. From the start, the undead were weak against fire. An ant's hiding here. Thud. One of the 5 fire tars moved. Muyang's face distorted. He tried his best to hide but was unable to fool the fire tar's senses. Different from humans, they were able to use the surrounding temperature to detect living creatures. If this wasn't the fire tar's territory, he would have been able to walk away leisurely without getting caught. If I use the undead to buy some time, I can leave. Muyang became tense as he took the lead. Just when Muyang held talismans and was about to use them, the fire tar who had seen Muyang tilted his head. A goblin? What, did you lose your pack? Goblin? Muyang nodded his head. 6 paths. That was right. Didn't Muyang's appearance change to that of a goblin king after being enlightened by the 6 paths? It wasn't weird for the fire tar to make a mistake. When Muyang didn't reply, the fire tar pointed towards a direction and spoke. Your pack moved towards the west. To hold a ceremony for the advent of or something. If you go now, you should be able to catch up. He didn't sense any ill will from the fire tar. It felt like he was giving directions not to an enemy or a friend but to a passing civilian. It seemed like the relationship between the fire tars and the goblins weren't bad. The advent of He had never heard of that name before. Of course, there wasn't a lot of information about the life of goblins, but it did seem likely that they would have a few strange ceremonies. Anyways, he knew the fire tars weren't hostile. I have to use this chance. Muyang calmed his heartbeat as much as he could. Since the fire tar might find something weird if his body temperature rose due to anxiety. 3 belts made from tree trunks wrapped around his waist. There were ranks among the fire tar, and a unique trait was that their ranks would be indicated by the amount of tree trunk belts around their waists. And if one had 3 belts, it meant he had the 2nd highest rank. Vice Chieftain of the Fire Tars. Do you know of Headley's cow? The language was automatically interpreted by the status viewer. The accent was different, but the fire tar replied without being suspicious. It was because the fire tar believed that he could only be a goblin since he had recognized that he was the vice chieftain. Headley's cow? I haven't heard of it. Have you guys heard of it? The other 4 fire tars shook their heads. He had only asked just in case, but it was like he thought. They say they haven't either. Then, could I receive some meat from you? The Fire Tar Vice Chieftain thought over the sudden request and nodded his head. It's not like the amount a small goblin eats would leave a mark, so do what you want. Aquatora, the dinosaur-shaped monster, was huge. Even then, it was only enough to fill the 5 Fire Tars' bellies. Muyang walked in an honorable manner and sliced off a hunk of Aquatora meat. Then he ate as gluttonously as he could. The Fire Tars' territory is vast. If I can't leave it, then I have to blend in. There was no guarantee that there was only one Fire Tar tribe. There could be others that were more hostile to others, so it's difficult to expect the rest to treat a goblin with goodwill. And eating together gave a sense of attachment to a group. In this moment, Muyang was acting as if he belonged to the same group as the 5 Fire Tars. The Vice Chieftain looked at his figure with interest. A goblin would usually be shocked and scared at the sight of us. You're quite an interesting one. It was like he watching a small animal's cute tricks. Muyang wiped the grease off his lips and said, I came from a very far place. Don't group me with other goblins. All goblins are the same, what could be different? Muyang's expression distorted. I am different, but this land is too harsh to me. I want to get stronger by catching prey that are my level. If you tell me a method, I will compensate you the best I can. The Fire Tars had been here the longest. They would know exactly what lived where. There was a limit to exploring by himself, since he might meet an opponent too difficult to handle like now. He was lucky this time. However, he couldn't always be lucky. This land is too barren for a lone goblin to live by himself. The Vice Chieftain rubbed his chin as he continued. There are bugs that gnaw on the trunk of the pum tree. They dig holes in the ground, so it's hard for us to hunt them. If you can deal with them, I'll tell you a way. He offered a deal. Not bad. It wasn't bad to cooperate with the rulers of this territory. If he was to gain their trust, he would be able to find Headley's cow. It was foolish to move without any information, but it wasn't good to stay still either. Muyang had to get stronger. Multiple times what he was now. Hey, I'll handle that for you. They made a deal. The Vice Chieftain said it without any expectations. The pum tree was one of the trees the Fire Tars took care of, and although it couldn't compare to the world's largest, it was an enormous tree. It was the size of a small mountain, so there were a large number of bugs gnawing on its trunk. There wasn't 10 or 20,000, but a number easily exceeding 100,000. And it was impossible for a single goblin to handle them all. Although it was a joke, the Fire Tars only thought to pull a prank on this oblivious goblin. No way a goblin could handle this troublesome problem that even we Fire Tars couldn't handle. The pum tree played a crucial role in the lives of the Fire Tars. The Fire Tars were unstable life forms. Unless they calmed the flames with the roots of the pum tree, they would one day be consumed by their own flames and die. And obviously, once the pum tree disappeared, the Fire Tars would move their territory. 3 years from now. The Vice Chieftain shook his head. In 3 years, the pum tree would be eaten by the bugs and die. And the Fire Tars had no way to stop it. There was no way they could burn the pum tree to kill bugs that lived deep in its roots. It was a problem they just tossed to a unique goblin that had appeared. They never expected that a small and weak goblin could handle this problem. Crush. He stomped on the bug that was crawling out. The bug instantly exploded and green liquid sprayed out everywhere. There's no end to this. There was a countless amount of small fist-sized bugs. There looked to be hundreds of bugs crawling out around the mountain-sized tree. Even if he caught them all, it would be difficult to get all the bugs that were below. They looked similar to treebeard bugs. Although they looked similar to the treebeard bugs that gnawed on trees, their sizes were significantly larger. Was it because they gnawed on the pum tree? What was more, it was hard to find a place where they had reproduced to such levels. Please give me your orders. Muyang summoned all his undead. Then the blazing spear soldier kneeled and asked while the rest quietly looked at Muyang. The Black Sun Warrior. He turned his head to look at the warrior wearing full black armor. He was the strongest out of all the undead he had made until now. If he was created when Horus was alive, it would have been hard for him to have become a death warrior. Points were added because he was a warrior of death. Muyang ordered all his undead. Get rid of all the surrounding bugs. Provided you don't burn the tree. The pum tree was of utmost importance to the fire tars. It almost to the point of deification. It would be a problem if he burned it. And since the fire tars village was close, they would rush here the moment the tree started to burn. I will follow your orders. Knock. Knock. All the undead moved quickly and started to kill the bugs. They killed tens of bugs a second. Just like that, they killed bugs until night, but there was no end in sight. Let's change the method. It seemed that recklessly killing bugs wasn't the answer. With this much, it seemed likely that they reproduced extremely quickly. Muyang understood his mistake and looked at it from a different angle. Treebeard bugs dig a tunnel and lay eggs in one place. As soon as he came to that thought, Muyang quickly opened his mouth. Look for their tunnel. If you search around the tree, there should be a large area dug out. Go in and get rid of all the eggs. There would be no end by simply killing the bugs. He had to get rid of the eggs to stop them from reproducing. However, it didn't take long for him to realize that this method was wrong as well. Exactly 3 days later, Muyang gave up. There were too many eggs. It was the same with the tunnels. Just where did this reproducing ability come from? Muyang looked around. Perhaps it was because the Fire Tars village wasn't far from here, but no monsters came to this place. The only things here were the pum tree and the bugs. However, the thing that was becoming the bugs' food was the tree's roots. Their numbers infinitely increased by eating the roots. I have to handle this. If I can curry favor with the Fire Tars, it will be easier for me in the future. The Fire Tars were the top among the high-ranked monsters. It was a chance to earn their protection. Although they were monsters, he didn't care, since there were humans who were less than monsters. Above all, they were flaming warriors, and he was very interested in their spoils of war. If he was lucky, he might even be able to obtain useful equipment. There are only bugs. Muyang thought carefully. He pondered while even reducing his sleep. A reproduction ability that exceeded common sense. To get rid of the bugs, he had to handle the root cause. After 2 days, a thought suddenly pierced his mind. There were only bugs. There weren't any natural predators.